Release That Witch Eye by Ermu. Chapter 301 Bomb and Wine. The day after the witches from Sleeping Island moved into their new home, Roland called City Hall Premier Minister Barav to his office. "I want you to issue another recruitment notice," Roland said, while he pushed the first draft of details in front of Barav, a week-long temporary job for about 10 people, preferably women. Barav picked up the paper, read it again before asking. "Your Highness, excuse me, what is starch? Do you know about wheat flour?" The Premier Minister hesitated. "Are you referring to coarse powder or fine powder?" Wheat grains, after grinding, can be baked into bread or wheat cake. And if instead of using it you go a step further and filter out the bran, you get a fine powder. The output of the latter is only 6/10 of the former, and bread baked with it is softer, but its price is also very high, so only powerful aristocratic families are able to afford it. The thing Roland liked the most about Barav was that he had a comprehensive understanding concerning goods from all categories. Food shortage as a result of the lagging agriculture could mean something completely different depending on the consumer's social class. For example, with the frequently seen wheat, civilians would often put the wheat grains directly into their pot and cook congee, this way making the most out of their limited food. However, sometimes wheat shells and sand would also land in the boiling pot, which results in crackling sounds and cause tooth pains whenever they ate. Small aristocrats paid particular attention to this and would order people to sieve the sand and stones out of the wheat grain. Then they would grind it into a coarse powder and bake it into bread or pancake before eating. And at the top of the hierarchy, the wealthy families and powerful aristocrats, who didn't look at food as a mere way to fill their stomachs, but rather as something to be enjoyed. The wheat would be further sieved in the kitchen, removing the bran, to get fine white powder. The resulting baked bread was of yellowish cream color and when eaten not only tasted exquisite but also had a much sweeter flavor. The basis of starch is a fine powder which then goes through another purifying process, Roland explained. "After you hire the people, I'll send someone who will instruct them on what exactly we need them to do." "Then, continue to process?" Barav couldn't stop himself shouting out loud in shock. "How much wheat will they be needing for this?" "I do not need too much, only 300 or 400 kilograms, Roland paused, before opening his mouth again. "Fill up a basket that is about the size of my table." Barav nodded and asked further, "Why do they need to be women?" "Because they will do things more carefully. Moreover, I want to see more women following the path of a worker, instead of being idle at home." Roland suddenly had an idea, so he asked, "At present, it seems that the education of border towns' women's classes are progressing more quickly, right? Although the head of the Ministry of Education is Lady Scroll, the situation is indeed like this. They can't do much more than taking care of the children and do housework, so they spend most of their time increasing their reading and writing skills. That being the case, I request that after the next round of examination, you will take the lead for the City Hall and recruit a batch of female apprentice, in that way gradually expanding the proportion of women posts," Roland commanded. "Your Highness, there is no precedent for it," Barav complained. "If they only have to be careful, my apprentice aren't worse than any woman." "If there is no precedent we have to create one," Roland bluntly said. "This is also the easiest and quickest way to increase the labor force without expanding the total population. If all women can take on a small task in building border town, my available staff will double. The only thing I'm asking you to do is to lead people to change their view. As long as the pay is attractive, I think they should come over on their own one by one." After Barav retired, Roland heard Nightingale's laughter next to his ear, followed by her asking a question. "What kind of delicious thing are you planning to make this time?" "Starch? It's not something you can eat," Roland said, after taking a mouthful of tea, "even though you can indeed get some pretty good food from the leftover materials after processing. First soak fine wheat flour in water, then rub and scrub it until the water had entirely blanched, then move on to another water basin and continue. In the end, it will become a sticky mass known as gluten. The gluten can be used for deep fry or stir fry and has a texture which is both pliable and tough. When smeared with honey or sprinkled with flavoring after leaving the pot, all in all, it made for a very delicious meal." But Roland's focus was not on food. By sifting and afterward letting the milky white water stand still, it would form a precipitation which was precisely the starch he was looking for, and was also a main ingredient used in manufacturing explosives. Since the experiments with nitroglycerin hadn't started yet, there was no possibility that he would have access to TNT, so nitrostarch was his most immediate opportunity for making powerful explosives. It also shared the same manufacturing process as nitrocellulose. The finished product had a low sensitivity, and couldn't be ignited by an open fire. Instead, one needed to use a fuse for it to detonate. Furthermore, it was more powerful than TNT and had thus been widely used as a substitute for it during the two world wars. With highly pure starch, the alchemic apprentices who already knew the manufacturing process for nitrocellulose by heart should also be able to quickly prepare a batch of nitrostarch. After lunch, just as Roland was planning to go back to his room to take a nap, he suddenly heard someone knocking on his door. 9 out of 10 times it was Anna who would come to find him at this hour. So when he heard the knocking sound, his heartbeat immediately began to dance. Can it be, after falling asleep last time because of her exhausted, she decided to come over at noon? Come in. However, the door creaked as it was pushed open, and Roland started when he saw Evelyn standing outside. This, now, isn't what I've been expecting at all. He coughed twice, then showed a reassuring smile as he asked, "What's the matter?" Hearing his question, Evelyn entered the room, and walked over to the edge of the table and bowed down in salute. All in all, she seemed a bit nervous. "Your Highness, I would like to ask you a question." "Don't tell me it is going to be the same question again. Why are you so kind to us witches?" However, in accordance with treating them like comrades, it was important to be as warm as the spring wind, so he smiled and said, "What question do you want to ask?" Why did you want me to come to Border Town?" For a moment Roland was slightly surprised. Can it be that she doesn't like the taste of the wine? "My kind of ability isn't only inferior to Sylvie's, it is practically at the same level as Lotus and Honey's," she whispered. "It's just wine tasting. However, a monthly salary of 1 gold royals is already enough for you to hire a specialized wine brewer from King City. What are your thoughts about those wines?" "At first I thought they burned too much, only by slowly drinking them was I able to accept them. As for those 3 wines mixed with ice cubes, fruit juice, and syrup, their taste is richer." "But that is merely my personal opinion," Evelyn replied cautiously. "My family's pub only sold cheaply priced wines and diluted Alesh, the aristocracy's tendencies. I do not know anything about that." "As it turns out she isn't questioning the wine," the prince breathed out in relief. He got up and opened the bookcase, then took out a jar of ale from the top and put it in front of Evelyn with the question, "Can you turn this jar of ale into the wine I brewed?" "I think that shouldn't be a problem." She stretched out her hand, and held it above the jar. A moment later the yellow ale began to change. In the wake of the rising bubbles, the ale became more and more clear, until it finally turned as crystal clear as plain boiled water, yet Roland could already smell its strong alcoholic fragrance. Unable to stop himself, he dipped his finger in a little, then put it into his mouth. It tasted bitter and burning at the same time. This was the taste of highly purified alcohol. Roland couldn't help but begin to laugh, while saying, "That's the reason I picked you." Looking at the puzzled Evelyn, he patted her hand and explained, "I'm going to set up an alcohol factory." "No, a brewery. Would you like to be the chief winemaker?" Chapter 302 The Bugle Horn of the Decisive Battle. At the palace in the Kingdom of Eternal Winter, flames were raging within the fireplace. Compared to Grey Castle with its 4 seasons, here the summers were especially short, and the autumn was only like an advance notice for the impending arrival of a severe winter. There wasn't even enough time to change into shorter garments before the cold wind came back once again. Garcia Wimbledon sat on the throne with a fox fur coat draped over her shoulders, listening to the complaints and demands of the nobility. She didn't like the palace. The pillars, walls, and floors were all built out of snow-white stones, each piece polished until it was smooth and shining, just like ice in general. Despite the fact that she already had 2 additional layers of cushion on her seat, she could still feel the bitter chill of the cold iron chair. "This damned castle is like an iceberg, absolutely frustrating. I'll wait for the situation to stabilize, And the first thing I'm going to do after that is to smash all of the walls and floors to bits, then relay it with dark brown granite slabs afterward. Your Majesty, I hope you can bring justice for me, a noble said, looking at her with a scowling expression. Prior to this, he had used a lot of words, where in fact, a few would have been sufficient. At the time when the church was occupying the kingdom of endless winter, some nobles who had done many evil deeds had been put on a public trial which had been presided over by Archbishop Heather. Most of the nobles had been sent to the gallows. However, this guy was among the lucky ones and had only been punished with the confiscation of his assets, which had then been equally divided among the victims. I can understand your request. Private property shouldn't be plundered, Garcia pondered for a moment and then slowly said, but the specific amount is hard to define. Well, if you can provide me with the testaments of the last 5 years of financial income and expenditure, I can evaluate an average value and give you a part of the seizures as compensation. But the mob has looted my house, and I'm afraid the records are. Then I can only follow the published announcement and compensate you according to your title. Garcia interrupted, take a look around you, they are all nobles who have suffered from looting. If I give you more, some of them would end up getting less. That's right. Only God would know if the number you reported is the truth or not. Why are you so troublesome, Knight Halon? These gold royals aren't yours. You have it already quite good, just take a look at your associates, they can only go to heaven and find God to demand compensation. Seeing all of the surrounding nobles glare at him, he was forced to shrink back, bow deep in salute and say, in that case, please compensate me according to the standard. Thank you for your kindness, Your Majesty. Excellent, Garcia smiled and then ordered, next. My regards to you, Your Majesty. A white-haired old man stepped out of the crowd and caressed the glittering silver heron family emblem on his chest reverently. Marquis Bodo, I remember that the church's thugs didn't attack your territory. Yes, that's right, he nodded, not that they didn't want to, rather that they couldn't. The inundated snow ridge is difficult to attack. So, my knights were able to block all of the invading bandits. However, my child wasn't as fortunate. On the day of the riots, he was on duty within the imperial palace, and for the purpose of protecting the queen, not only was he killed by the believers, but his body was also hung above the city gate. It was not until you arrived in the kingdom of eternal winter, that he could be freed from his humiliation. That's truly a tragic story, Garcia assumed a grieving expression and sighed, before asking, so, what is your request? The name of the man who killed him is the Butcher. Nowadays he is the leader of the remaining rebels. That group of people are hiding within the impassable mountain range north of US. I want revenge for my child. The Marquis calmly declared. From the beginning, I didn't have that many troops under my control. They are already keeping the peace during the day, patrol, guard the city wall as well as the granary. It would be quite difficult to split my men and dispatch the troop to the barren mountains and wild hills just to go find a group of 100 exiled thugs. She shook her head and said in regret, furthermore, when the winter comes, the heavy snowfall will also close off the mountains, thus, making it impossible for them to get any supplies. So, they will freeze to death sooner or later. There is no need for you to be so impatient. Your Majesty, I'll only be able to find peace if it's me wielding the sword that kills my child's murderer. I also don't need you to send any warriors to search for the thugs. There are many natural caves at the foot of the mountain, they surely will be hidden within one of them. But most of the caves' entrances are very narrow, and if they used stones to block the entrance, it would even be difficult for the knights to attack them. I hope you can provide me with the alchemical creation that had been able to blow up the city gates. I'll do the rest by myself. Does he want to get his hands on the snow powder? Garcia frowned. That stuff has a large power, and it's strong enough to be the trump card in a hopeless war and alter the outcome. It absolutely cannot be allowed to spread out. At the time, she was about to declare her refusal, the other opened his mouth again. If you grant me this request, I am willing to return to court and serve you. The Silver Heron family will fully support your ruling over the kingdom of eternal winter. This sentence then made Garcia swallow her words. At the time, the church executed the queen, they also killed some chief ministers. Here, the Marquis of Bodo has a lot of prestige. If he were to serve as my prime minister, all the remaining nobles would follow along. To some degree, it can also make up for the deficient administration and also turn around this awkward situation. This request is not too much, she thought for a while, then after finally coming to a decision she said, but I cannot put the alchemy powder directly into your hands. When you require it, I will send a special alchemist who will provide you with assistance to blow open the hole. After the end of the court session, Garcia returned to the back room, where Ryan was already waiting for her with a cup of warmed fruit wine. Thanks for your trouble, Your Majesty. As expected, those nobles were all taken over by you. In this way, even if we don't depend on the Wolf King, you can still swallow the entire kingdom of eternal winter slowly. As long as there is no church, the queen said as she shrugged. The church, in their act of stripping the nobles of their rightful inheritance, had pushed them to her side. Now, with the support of those very people, coupled with the crippling of the church's former base of power, it had been very easy for her to gain a foothold in the capital. But if she wanted to control the kingdom of eternal winter, she still had a long way left to go. It was here where the people were influenced by the church the most. When she dispatched her black sail fleet to wipe out the church's bases in other major cities, they had continually suffered under the attack of the believers. Therefore, it was crucial to form a coalition with the Wolfshark Kingdom. Not only so that they could resist the church together, but also to weaken the influence the church held over the population by accepting people from Wolfshark Kingdom. As for those stubborn civilians, it will be alright if they are just cleanly killed off. Oh, by the way, a messenger from the Wolfshark Kingdom has arrived with a letter for you, Ryan informed her, as he took an envelope from his pocket. Because you were dealing with government affairs, I didn't dare to bother you. Garcia opened the envelope, took out the letter, and began to read the letter carefully. Is it bad news? The church has sent out troops once again, she said in a low voice. They've taken the land route and are heading straight for Wolfshark City. They've already broken through several of the recently set up defensive lines. What? Ryan started with big eyes at her in disbelief, then he said, the months of demons will be coming soon. Don't tell me they've set out while completely disregarding the new holy city? Showing a frowning expression, Garcia sat back in her desk. She knew that the church would never let them go, but she hadn't expected that the other side would move so fast. If they had just waited with the war until spring next year, her preparation would have been complete. However, the enemy apparently didn't want to give them any space to breathe. If she just sat idly while the Wolfshark Kingdom asked for help, and the kingdom got destroyed as a result, it wouldn't be long before it would be her turn to disappear. But this also contained an opportunity. If she could make the church waste its forces on the city walls of the Wolfshark City, they would be facing a great disaster when the demonic beasts invaded Hermes at a large scale. They might have sent out the god's punishment Amy, but by now, she also had formidable weapons like the snow powder, the hard-to-extinguish Black River water, the demonic fire powder, as well as Wolfshark City's towering city walls. With all this, she would surely be able to consume a large number of their vital forces. Thinking until here, Garcia commanded, pass along my orders, the Black Sail Fleet is to get ready for battle. This year, we will be spending the winter within Wolfshark City. Chapter 303 Preparation for the Air Raid. After going through a week of assembling and testing, Roland and Anna together completed the development of an impact detonator. Compared to the fuse of the artillery shells, it does not need to withstand high temperature and pressure, and there was also no high G overload when it left the chamber, so the structure was very simple. However, due to the necessary precise constitution of the firing pin and the spring, the two had to test many variations before they finally succeeded. The main problem was that no one knew how much elasticity the spring needed to make sure that it wouldn't go off if it accidentally fell. While they also needed to guarantee that it would always trigger when it was launched normally. He and Anna only changed the thickness and hardness of the spring a little before testing it once again. Fortunately, Anna and Lucia had done a lot of the required work in advance. As a result, Roland had more and more high-quality materials available at hand. Ultimately, after a lot of testing they'd chosen to use steel alloy number 1365, which had a relatively high hardness, but a toughness that was on the lower side. Even if the bomb fell from 1 meter, it wouldn't be compressed to the end. After the selection of an appropriate spring, the rest was easy. Just like the saying, where water flows, a canal would form. Even though Roland had never seen the look of a real detonator before, he could still rely on his work's experience to come up with a design by himself. Compared to modern ones, it was certainly lacking, but for the current crude big black bombs, this would be enough. The finished version of the impact detonator was in the form of a cylinder, 12 centimeters long, about 5 centimeters in diameter, with a spiral pattern on the underside which could be screwed into the opening at the top of the bomb. The interior looked like a downwards convex groove, while the firing pin shared a similar appearance, so that it could also fit into the groove. In its normal state, the spring would lock the upper part within the indentation, while the striker would land right inside the indentation, only 1 finger apart from the primer. For the purpose of taking precautions, Roland had also made a hole in the head of the firing pin, so that a bolt could be fixed on top of the ammunition case. Thus, before the bombing, they first had to pull out the bolt, only then could the strike move up and down. The simulation test was held on a sunny afternoon. Because this bomb, which filled with a padding of gravels instead of black gunpowder, had already reached 5 times Nightingale's weight, Roland decided not to board the hot air balloon, and instead watched the process with an observation mirror from 300 meters away from the impact location. Apart from himself, there was also the commander of the Fifth Army Iron Axe and the Chief Knight Carter Lannis, who were here to watch this first test. "Are you planning to use a hot air balloon to throw the giant explosive packages into the heart of the Imperial Palace?" After listening to Roland's battle plan, Carter struggled to believe his ears. To attack from an altitude of 2 kilometers above the ground while simultaneously completely disregarding the city walls and the forces of the garrison, ultimately overturned his former concept of what defined combat, and of course, living in border town during this last year, his view had already gone through changes many times before. As long as the controlling system is fully functioning, it really isn't impossible to achieve, Roland nodded. Right now, Timothy is pressing people into service once more, to build up his new militia force. If we cannot stop him, the Western Territory will inevitably suffer another attack from his drugged forces. And even if we force him back again, it won't give us even one bit of benefit. The secret letter that Theo had sent had indicated that Timothy was currently still using the same old routine of trying to consume his strength. However, Roland didn't know if the team dispatched by Berev could overtake their counterparts and rope in the people and make them come to border town. Supposing that you can really release Heaven's Fury thunder above Timothy's head, he absolutely will be frightened, not knowing what to do. Iron Axe said excitedly, "This is absolutely a heaven's punishment which no one can resist." "That's what I'm hoping for," Roland said with a smile. Although Theo had mentioned in the letter that Timothy had most likely figured out the method for making black gunpowder and opened a workshop in the inner city to try and mass-produce the dangerous product, after thinking it over repeatedly, Roland still decided that the roof of the Imperial Palace should be the target of the bombing. The reason was simple: the palace was the only place which was eye-catching enough. When looking from a height of 2,000 meters, even the most magnificent city of Grey Castle was only the size of half a palm. Therefore, they also had to find a good target point to throw off the bomb in advance. And the palace was located at the midpoint of the inner city district, and was surrounded by a red tile wall. Furthermore, pure white stones covered the roof of the palace, would be particularly eye-catching while they were aiming, which meant it would almost be impossible for them to miss their target. But the workshop was different. Roland didn't possess a layout plan of King City, and the ground was also unmanned, and if he only relied on spoken words it would be quite difficult to describe the position of the selected target. Plus, the workshop's area wasn't large. If the bomb were to fall on top of a civilian's house, the gains of their plan wouldn't make up for the losses they would face. Suddenly, a white shadow fell straight to the ground, causing a smoke pillar to rise from the test field, followed by the muffling sound of something smashing into the ground a moment later. "It seems as if the bomb has hit the ground," Roland put away the mirror. "Let's go and take a look at the result." After a week of training, Lightning had significantly improved her bombing technique. This time, the bomb had hit the ground 5 meters away from the center of the target. It had drilled its whole body into the earth and the outer shell had been substantially deformed due to the force of the impact. After Cloud Gazer had landed, Anna used her black flame to cut open the bomb, so that everyone could see that the soil near the detonator has been charred black. This proved that the primer's temperature was high enough to ignite the gas sprinkled on top of the gravel, which was what they had used in place of black gunpowder, and this showed that the detonator itself was working fine. If they instead filled the interior of the bomb with nitrate starch, it could easily create a 4 to 6 meters deep hole, and kill all of the people who hadn't taken shelter that were within the vicinity of 50 meters. Now, after having fully trained the airdrop, the next step was to organize their combat plan. Roland let his gaze wander over everyone surrounding him, then opened his mouth and slowly said, "We will execute the surprise raid on King City next Monday. First, Iron Axe will lead a group of 50 firearms and escort the witches to the outskirts of Silver City. There is a mountain ridge in the area which can shelter you from detection, and it should be perfect if you want to set up camp or send off a balloon." "I hear and obey, Your Majesty." Iron Axe agreed. "Why can't we just fly directly from Border Town?" Wendy asked. "No, that would be too far," Roland shook his head. "From the Western Territory to King City it took at least a week. When traveling with Cloud Gazer or flying directly there, it would still take them around 3 days, together with the return trip it would be 6 days. Furthermore, after the installing the dropping mechanism, the basket would only have enough space to carry 2 people, which meant that Nightingale would be unable to follow them. With the exception of Anna, none of the other witches had any fighting ability, so making them spend 6 nights in the wild it would be much too high a risk, which was something that would be impossible for him to feel at ease about. By starting from Silver City, you will be able to complete the bombing in just 1 day and return even before the sun goes down. Secondly, the witches assigned to the mission are Anna, Wendy, Lightning, Maggie, Nightingale, and Sylvie. The latter 2 are responsible for monitoring the surroundings of the camp, while the attack will be carried out by the first 4 people according to the training method, especially Lightning. He looked towards the little girl. "Whether we succeed or not all depends on you. You can leave it to me." The latter patted her chest. "In that case, the last thing I wanted to mention was that you should all pay attention to your safety," Roland said while stressing each word. "I will be waiting for your return here in Border Town." 4 days later, the first bomb, Easterly Wind No. 1, was loaded on top of a cart, and under the escort of the First Army, it boarded a cargo ship to Silver City. Chapter 304. An unexpected but pleasant surprise. May would never have thought that by the time she was about to set foot on the road back to Border Town, her heart would once again be filled with so much expectation. The woods along the Redwater River had already begun to turn yellow, and the breeze blowing directly in one's face brought along a trace of chill. The waves of the shimmering river were rolling under her feet, and from time to time she was able to see the fallen tree leaves floating past the side of the ship. Now, without all of the anxiety and restlessness she had felt on her last trip, the exuberant surrounding autumn landscape seemed like it was something which came out of a poem or painting. "Miss May," a voice, full of respect, came from behind. "Your play of The Witch Diary, is it true that His Highness wrote the play for you personally?" When May turned around, she saw that a group of actresses had gathered behind her. The person standing in front looked at her with a tense expression. She recalled that this one's name was Swallow. "Aha, sorry," Irene waved at her, then bowed and said with an apologizing smile. "I wasn't able to answer this question. So without any better option I had to let them come and ask you." "This fool," May thought and gave her a supercilious look. If it had been her from the past, she would have only dumped them with a sneer. But now, after having spent so much time together with Irene, her patience had unexpectedly grown stronger day by day, and thus she dared to answer, "No, His Highness didn't write it for me. Rather it was the City Hall's Minister of Education, Lady Scroll, who had written The Witch Diary." Is that so?" Swallow blinked in wonder. "At the time you argued with Bella, we all thought it was the truth. His Highness wrote it personally and, His Highness wrote it personally for me." The meaning of those 2 wordings were poles apart. How could these people grasp the first half of the sentence, but totally dismiss the second half? Thinking of this, she then said to them, but His Highness endorsed both the script writing and the theatrical performance. Therefore, when Bella ridiculed the script, it was indeed equivalent to mocking His Highness. Regarding that point, I haven't fooled her. Have you ever seen His Royal Highness? I heard that he has the royal family's mark of long grey hairs and looks extraordinary handsome, is that right? I also heard that he was born with the natural disposition of a romantic and has many lovers. Was it really like that? Looking at this group of lively little girls, May couldn't help but knit her brows. Curse it. I should never have responded to their curiosity. Alright, that's enough, don't you girls bother Miss May, Rosia said and began shooing the group of females away while showing an apologizing expression towards May. No harm, she shrugged and then continued to enjoy the scenery along the coastal area. After all, I was the one who sought out trouble. I do not understand, Rosia scratched her head, why did you want to take them along when we left? Of the 35 people, only 2 people have stood on stage before, while 26 of them have not yet completed any of the courses for their drama classes. According to what you'd previously said, they cannot even be considered as baby chicks. They are still inside their eggshell, yet to hatch. Even if the Lord's requirements for the play are not so demanding, I'm afraid that even His Highness would find it difficult to accept them. In case you want to retaliate against Bella, you should have tried to court some more experienced supporting actors. I didn't intend to let all of them perform. Ah? The other side froze in place for a moment. They can read the scripts for a play, isn't that right? May asked laughingly, although they still have a long way to go until they can enter the stage, all of them can at least read and write. Don't tell me you haven't discovered it yet? His Royal Highness is currently exactly in need of that exact skill. She paused for a moment. Do you truly think that His Royal Highness Roland Wimbledon loves drama so much that he recruited us for a play? This? In case it was Lord Petrov, then the answer would be yes. Before he had taken over Longsong Stronghold, he had the habit of going to the theater once a week. However, His Highness Roland, apart from viewing the first play of a new theatrical work, he didn't appear in the town square for the rest of the time, so he never promoted the drama for his own enjoyment. Instead, he intends to spread his views to the masses through the drama. May paused, before going on to say, compared to the first shows, which emphasized resisting oppression and the message that witches aren't evil, the new play, The Dawn of a New Era and New City have moved towards recruiting people, and one becoming rich through one's own efforts as the message. I'm merely following along with his idea and using the small amount of power I currently have. So, it was originally like this. I never thought about that, Rosia seemed to be speechless. To polish and refine the script for a play, in addition to putting yourself into the character you are playing, it is also important to try and understand the overall story as much as possible if you want to express its true meaning. This is also a quality that a good actor needs to possess. Yes, thank you for your guidance. She bowed. Be at ease, May said as she showed her a reassuring smile. Even in the case that you don't want to perform any longer, you should still be able to find a pretty good job inside border town. Maybe you can enter the city hall and become an administrative officer. After all, His Highness does not require you to have any sort of status, and he also doesn't look at your family background. This road would be much easier than going on stage. When the vessel arrived at the town, May saw Ferlin Eltek waiting to greet them at the pier. Naturally, he was here to see Irene. When she saw the girl dash forward and happily throw herself in his arms, she could only gently sigh. Isn't that man Morning Light? He hadn't been exiled by His Royal Highness. The first night of the Western Territory is magnificent, Swallow said. I thought he and the theater star would be dash. Who's talking such nonsense? May's cold voice made everyone suddenly close their mouths. Hurry up with your luggage and disembark. Gant and Rosia will take you to the city hall so that you can register your identity. Everything else will be arranged by them. Yes, came everyone's respectful reply. Walking down the pier, Ferlin, with his arm around his wife, came over to greet her, and spoke to her. Miss May, Irene just told me about the clash in the theater. Thank you for the kindness you showed her. There is no need for you to thank me, May couldn't accept it, even though it looked like the other party was looking for trouble with her, but in fact, their target was me. Even so, I still want to thank you. The knight laughed brightly and continued to say, if it weren't for you stepping forward, she would have cried right on the spot. After the two had left, May curled her lips and alone she began carrying her luggage toward the residential district. Although she had already let go of her feelings, but seeing such a scene still had her feeling some regret. Furthermore, that familiar figure also did not appear, which was contrary to the vow in his letter that he would be waiting for her with a pleasant surprise. Well, the other side, after all, is an important man to His Highness. Unlike Morning Light who can walk around as he wishes, right? Back home, May put away her luggage and was hit by a sense of relaxation that she hadn't felt for quite a long time. She took a long breath, took out the white wine from the cupboard and was about to pour herself a drink when a knocking sound came from the door. When she opened the door, Carter Lannis' awe-inspiring figure appeared before her. I did not expect you to be half an hour early, he wiped the sweat from his forehead. The moment I heard that the boat from Longsong Stronghold has arrived, I immediately rushed over from the barracks. I don't know why, I definitely didn't catch sight of him at the pier, and he obviously didn't go to receive me, but the moment I see him, my mood immediately lifts up. Do you want to drink a cup? No, I still have to work this afternoon, Carter waved his hand. Well, she nodded, the matters of His Highness are more important. I came because I want to give you a present. The chief knight took a white wooden box from his pocket and handed it to her. Is this the latest product of the convenience market? May asked full of curiosity as she took the wooden box. When she opened the lid, she saw a yellow-orange ring quietly stand at the bottom of the box. Its top was inlaid with a bright and transparent stone, it reflected the autumn sunlight falling through the window with a colorful light. There is no doubt that this ring is worth a lot of money, which makes it unlikely for it to be a selling item for the convenience market. And when nobles give a ring, it means, she couldn't help but cover her mouth. Miss May, are you willing to marry me? Carter asked her earnestly. Chapter 305 Chemical Breakthrough. 4 days had already passed since the witches, and the first army had set off. According to the plan, they should arrive at the outskirts of Silver City by tomorrow afternoon. Equipped with Honey's flying messengers, Roland received letters sent by the team every day. The letters were from Iron Axe, Anna, and Nightingale. Even though they weren't as fast as mobile phones, it was basically the same as a wireless telegraphing. In case there were several winged messengers on the same road, and if there existed birds who would always go to and from the same two places, it might have the same effect as text messaging. In the absence of Nightingale, the chief knight took over the responsibility of defending the castle. However, Roland couldn't understand why Carter always wore a happy expression these days. It seems like he's encountered something especially pleasing these past few days. Could it be that returning to his former task and acting as my personal guard is something that's worth being so happy about? He shook his head and focused his attention back on the report from his Minister of Construction, Karl van Bate. With the help of the witches from Sleeping Island, Border Town's construction projects were progressing at an amazingly rapid pace these past few months. First, there was the steel bridge across the Redwater River which had been successfully completed. Compared to the traditional stone bridges and wooden bridges, the structure of the steel bridge had been made in advance, only afterwards had it been hoisted into place. The 2 floating islands Lotus had raised within the river course had further simplified the former difficult task and also shortened the time needed to construct the main bridge to an amazing 1 month's time. Although, when one looked at it with eyes of a person in the future, the bridge did indeed seem short and narrow, and the architecture simple and crude, the theoretical capacity very low, turning it into a project which was purely a waste of material, but within this era it could be regarded as a magnificent super bridge. Its total length carrying on for more than 100 meters, the bridge's surface was smooth and offered enough space for 2 carriages to move side by side. Furthermore, even its lowest part still met the requirements to let an upriver sailboat pass through, something which a cumbersome stone bridge could never accomplish. Secondly, Lotus had also completed the construction of the new city wall. Those walls, made purely out of earth, had increased the town's area by more than 2 times. If they'd been placed in a modern area, the original town would be considered the veritable inner city. Roland, however, was more inclined towards the touring system. Perhaps someday in the future this place could expand into a giant city which even had 7 rings, and could then be formally crowned as the imperial capital. Lastly, regarding the construction of the Kingdom Avenue, Lotus had already leveled out some of the impassable mountain ranges extensions, so now the road could go straight through instead of going around, which had thus significantly reduced the overall length of the journey. "Your Highness, what do you want Lotus to construct next?" Carl asked after he reported on the progress. Roland was able to tell that he was brimming with admiration for her ability to transform the terrain, because, not only had he proposed that she be integrated into the Ministry of Construction, he'd even put forth a request to appoint her as the Vice Minister. Well, Roland was also already thinking about this question. There were 3 major construction projects he wanted to implement next. The first was the Seaport Project. Looking for small openings in the southern mountain ridge before caving in a path to the beach was a task he would have to rely on Lotus to achieve. Once they completed the transformation, the Western Territory would gain access to a seaward harbor. The second project was the residential expansion. Although City Hall had invested a lot of the workforce and financial resources to step up the construction of residential quarters, with winter soon to approach, by now there were nearly 3,000 people who would be unable to live in a warm brick house. Nowadays, erecting wooden sheds and simple shelters simply couldn't meet the requirements to resist the cold, so they needed a group of cave rooms with thick walls and kangs if they wanted to solve this problem. The third point was to set up a dock. If he wanted to produce shallow water gunboats, he first had to arrange for a large dock, which at the same time would also affect the passage of the Redwater River. Roland intended to reduce the height of the riverbank on the western side of border town, to form a dry dock and install a lift gate at the side of the Redwater River so that they can control the water intake and runoff. The scale of the necessary earthwork was immense, and he would also have to rely on Lotus' ability to complete it. After considering for a moment, he finally decided to place the residential expansion as the first priority. Since they had invited the refugees from the eastern region to border town, they were going to have to take responsibility and provide them with the basic necessities of life. If they were to freeze or starve to death, then, not only would it be a loss for the Western Territory, but it would also reduce the people's attachment toward this place. "So where is the place we should build the temporary residences?" Carl asked. "The best place would be at the place of the current surf shanty town." Roland glanced at the map. "That place is far from the defense line of the city wall. They can also use the cover there to protect themselves from the wind coming from the impassable mountains." After the Minister of Construction left the room, Roland had just planned to take a short nap in his chair when Kyle Sichi arrived at the door. "Your Highness, the large-scale acid production method you have requested has been successfully developed." Hearing this sentence dispelled Roland's weariness immediately. He showed a smiling expression on receiving such a pleasant surprise. Roland stood up and said, "Really? Take me to see it." When their group came to the laboratory at the Redwater River, he saw a few gray jars and a kiln set up beside laboratory number 5. Each jar was the height of 2 people and had a pipeline connected to the top, which had a smooth shape, which had clearly been cut out by Anna. "I pay my respect to you, Your Highness," a very young-looking man said toward Roland and bowed. "I presume you're Chavez?" Although he had already learned about the several alchemist apprentices and outstanding alchemist that Kyle had brought from Redwater City, today was still the first time that he saw the other's appearance. "You even remember my name," Chavez said, astonished. "Mr. Sichi has mentioned you plenty of times before," Roland explained and patted his shoulder in encouragement. "Keep up the good work." Then, looking over to the chief alchemist, he asked, "How will this thing produce acid?" Kyle stroked his beard and said with a smile, "The successful manufacture is entirely according to a derivation of an equation of the elementary chemistry. You see those kilns, the purified sulfur will burn in the kiln, and through further heating the gas produced will pass through the pipes and into a lead jar." "Are all those devices made of lead?" "That's right, only lead can resist acid's corrosion." Kyle nodded. The nitrosulfuric acid will unceasingly sprinkle down from the lead pipe at the top of the jar, and, together with the hot sulfur dioxide below, the heated nitric acid will decompose into nitrogen oxide. Finally, the water and sulfur dioxide together will generate a sulfuric acid solution. This solution will flow out of a hole at the bottom. The smart thing about this reaction is that nitrogen oxide only acts as oxygen carriers, but by itself it can't be consumed. Therefore, the amount of nitric acid used is small, and once the reaction has started up, it can carry on working continuously. How is the output? Roland asked while agitatedly patting against a lead jar. Functioning large-scale acid production was the premise needed for mass production of smokeless gunpowder. As long as he could solve this problem, there was hope for the rise of a new generation of weapons and ammunition. This is the fourth device I've tested. The daily output may be as much as the weight of using the laboratory's dry distillation method for an entire week, the chief alchemist proudly said. Because it is a testing device, the volume isn't large. However, the capacity could be further improved if you could build lead jars with a larger capacity. That's good news, Roland said laughingly. Wait until Miss Anna comes back, and you can set up a larger acid plant right away. If the lead isn't enough, you can use iron instead. Miss Soraya's coating can make it resistant against the corrosion of the acid. Kyle nodded in agreement, but his next sentence made the bright smile on the prince's face turn stiff. Now that I accomplished the large-scale acid production and all the 5 laboratories are also filled with apprentices, Your Highness, can you reward me with the intermediate chemistry like you've promised? Chapter 306 Inside the Garden. Scroll stood behind His Highness Roland, attentively watching as he wrote out the manuscript. Autumn sunshine was falling in through the window onto her back, which made it feel like her whole body was being bathed in warmth. In addition to electronic gains and losses, what further content? Online class, very urgent. From time to time the prince would write something onto the paper and then began to lean his forehead on his hands while he pondered and said some difficult-to-understand nonsense. At first, Scroll was a little worried about the prince's health, but later on she discovered that this was His Highness' normal state when he was trying to recall his knowledge. Merely that today's symptoms seemed to be much more severe than ever before. Unfortunately, I cannot help him. Scroll lightly sighed. If there was a witch who could help him in this regard, I am afraid there is only one, Anna. She had already noted down all the content of the previous books His Highness had written in her brain, but it was merely noted down, nothing more. The past knowledge about those math and natural principles was something much deeper. Just reading it is already enough to make people's head turn muddle-headed. No wonder His Royal Highness feels so embarrassed. How about ending it here for today? Scroll couldn't stand it any longer and so she opened her mouth. Roland decided to give up and put down his pen, leaning his back against the chair, then said, I really envy you for your highly retentive memory. If I could be like you, why would I ever need to worry about exams? I would have been admitted to a famous school and walked to the pinnacle of life. She automatically ignored the other's later half of words as nonsense. Your Royal Highness, did they also demand you take those exams at the palace? Yes, or how to separate which prince is more outstanding than the others, he mumbled to himself. In fact, sometimes it is not good to remember everything, Scroll said with a smile. For example, bad experiences, or the times when you felt deeply hurt or sad, or when you were unable to forget when your life was still happy. At the time when she lived in the Seawind region, due to her identity of being poor, she had to suffer bullying and beatings countless times already. Until today, she could clearly remember the location of every hit, the faces of the perpetrators twisted in anger, and the pain of each kick. Only after finding shelter by the old captain with the broken leg did her life become slightly better. In fact, living in slums-like places, with each of them pillaging, fighting, and killing each other, was not much different from freezing or starving to death. For a long time, she had hated herself very much. Why were all her suffering still vivid in her mind? Because the memory of those scenes was still so clear. The nightmares she suffered during the nights were repetitions of her unbearable past. Later on, during her day of adulthood, when she awakened her branch ability magic book, she finally understood that her extraordinary memory was actually something that came along with her identity as a witch. Probably Roland could guess what she wanted to say, so he revealed an apologizing smile and said, "You might be right. Scroll suddenly felt warmth flowing through her heart. There were only very few people who cared about a witch's thoughts, not to mention, this person was even an illustrious member of the royal family. "It doesn't matter, those times have already passed, Your Highness." Roland Wimbledon, compared with other nobles she had seen, no, he was very different compared to all of the people she had met. He possessed a lot of learned knowledge, but all day long he only thought about how he could teach it to other people. His identity was that of a noble, however he didn't reject people that were below his rank. He enjoyed the praise of the crowd, he could act recklessly, but this was not everything to him. Instead, he also took care of other people's feelings. A desolate and impoverished town had undergone earth-shaking changes within 1 year. The freedom and peace that witches had longed for was actually granted to them by His Highness Roland. If she hadn't personally experienced it, she would never have believed that there could exist such a ruler in the world. Nowadays, Scroll had discovered that her own way of thinking had undergone some changes. Before this she hadn't approved of His Highness wanting to take a witch as his wife at all, but now she felt that regardless of who His Royal Highness married, he would take over the throne of Grey Castle. He wasn't like the others who kept with the routine of favoring those power-hungry and corrupt nobles, rather, he preferred to make a better life for his people. She faintly felt that this surge of strength seemed to be stronger than any previous force. "Ah, let it be," all of a sudden Roland said while rubbing his head, "this is the last page. Will you continue to record tomorrow?" "No, just give it to him like this. Together with the physics teaching material, it should be enough for him to study for a while." His Royal Highness took a new paper and quickly wrote down a few characters on it before he continued. "After all, it is a copy of a book from ancient times, so it should be normal to be missing most of it, right?" Scroll took the paper and saw the name of the book, Intermediate Chemistry, Remnant. After finishing her memorizing task, Scroll left the office and was preparing to go back to the city hall when the magnificent scenery of the back garden attracted her attention. After the completion of the castle wall expansion, the castle's backyard had almost reached the size of the town square. And now, less than a week after, it was already covered by all kinds of plants. There was no doubt that this must be a masterpiece of leaves. Scroll followed the paths formed by 2 rows of olive trees, step by step going towards the depths of the garden. After passing by a row of dense sugar cane, she saw leaves sitting on the shore of a pond. The other side hadn't bound her hair into the braided pigtails she usually wore during the daytime. Instead, today she had draped her head full of green long hair over one shoulder. Her spotless white feet were lightly splashing around within the water. She was holding some wheat grains in her hands, and from time to time she would throw them towards the fishes swimming around her feet. Unable to stop herself from chuckling out loud, whenever one of those fishes approached her and gently brushed against her toes. "Are your feet completely healed?" Scroll asked as she sat next to her. "Oh, it's you, Teacher Scroll." She blinked for a moment in confusion, then nodded happily and said, "Yes, Miss Nana has restored them to their original form. Like this, I finally don't need to endure the pain in my toes during winter." "Are all these plants you planted in the garden your improved versions?" "Well," Leaf said as she began to point happily towards each of them, "over there is the vine shed, here are the fruit trees, and there are the crops. I also asked His Royal Highness to bring me a batch of compost, just so that I could test the absorption quality of the new crops. In addition, there are dozens of birds' nests in the fruit trees, and the messengers honey raised are all sleeping on top of the trees." Scroll lovingly stroked her hair and said, "I thought you would be the first witch of the Witch Alliance to evolve. After all, when we were within the impassable mountain range, the ability you displayed wasn't below that of Kara." His Royal Highness said that the possibility to evolve one's ability comes along with the understanding of our ability. "Plant cells do indeed make people feel they are unfathomable is what I've thought long ago, but now I think that at the root of it they are all the same. You see, a bundle of tiny grass when fused together can change into flexible vines, but if they were different, how could something like that ever be possible?" Scroll opened her mouth, but she didn't know whether she should comfort her or agree with her, so finally, she said, "Your ability, even without evolving, can already do so much for His Highness." "I feel that it is not far away from me," Leaf said, shaking her head, while her eyes were filled with bright light. animals are living, plants are living, and even several parts of them together are living as well. Birds need trees to build a nest, while their droppings once again bring nourishment to the trees. A forest can provide a living being with everything it needs, while at the same time the forest extends due to the provided moisture of all living things. She paused. Look at this garden. I think I already found a way to move forward. Chapter 307 Death from the Sky. The hot air balloon was flying 2,000 meters above ground, which was something lightning had measured by flying vertically up towards the sky. When she raised her head, it seemed as if the clouds she could see were almost within reach, looking like a loose cotton. However, if she really wanted to touch them, she would still have to fly a few hundred meters or so further up. The whole hot air balloon was painted with blue and white patches, which from a distance, gave it the exactly same appearance as the sky. Furthermore, they themselves had also put on camouflage clothing. The same was even true for Easterly Wind 1. According to His Highness' requirements, it was important that this surprise attack was sudden and came from under cover. Therefore, the First Army had even gotten off the boat before they reached Silver City's pier and walked to the back of the nearby mountain. Under Sylvie's surveillance, the team was able to avoid all eyes, not drawing anybody's attention from beginning to end. After they finished setting up camp, Cloud Gazer slowly took off. They would carry out the bombing mission on the next day. After spending 1 week on the street, today was the beginning of the first month of autumn. Due to the insufficient possibilities to observe from inside the basket, Maggie flew out in front of the balloon like a white shadow, taking over the responsibilities for directing and investigating their route. Even from such a high altitude, after changing into a white-tailed eagle, she was quickly able to identify the roads connecting the towns and the carriages that was traveling on them. At this point, the eagle's eyes were much better than an observation mirror. Fortunately, the other side cannot change the place at which the bomb will drop, Lightning thought, otherwise I really wouldn't have anything to do. Are you tired? Anna asked, leaning over the side of the basket. Come in and take a rest, we won't come across any devil here anyway. The little girl shook her head. At this speed, I can fly the whole day long. Aren't you a little nervous? Wendy asked, as she came and leaned over the side. I'm not, she said, curling her lips. I have practiced the course of event many times, and the palace is so big, it'll be impossible for me to miss. Is that so? Wendy smiled. Anyway, do not try to be brave. His Highness said that the most important thing is our safety. Also, the incident at the Devil's Town during the investigation mission wasn't your fault. What, Wendy interrupted her in a gentle tone. Anyone could see that you've been frustrated these last few days, but you weren't too cowardly to fight, rather, you just haven't gained enough battle experience yet. If it had been me in your place, I definitely couldn't have done any better. Indeed, Nightingale possesses reflexes and skills which most of us witches don't have, Anna added in comfort. You might as well come in and have a rest. The amount of magic you will need to adjust the impact point of the bomb won't be a small amount. Hearing the comforting words coming from the two, Lightning sniffed gently, then bowed her head as she entered the basket. Even before she had landed, Wendy had already wrapped her into her bosom. No one blames you, so you should also not blame yourself, understand? Okay. After flying for an entire morning, Maggie flapped her wings and returned to Cloud Gazer to report to the other three. The King City of Grey Castle is in front of us, we are almost there, goo. Lightning immediately flew out of the basket and lifted the lookout mirror, only to see that it was exactly as His Highness had said. King City's city wall was such a grand sight, that it was still clearly visible even from so high up in the sky. It arose from the earth, just like a blue-green colored crooked string as it described the scope of the city. Furthermore, the fingernail-sized white spots in the middle of the gray block seemed especially eye-catching. According to the first plan, they would first drop leaflets all over King's City before releasing Easterly Wind No. 1. But after going through several test runs, they finally had to accept that there was not any possible way for them to control the direction the papers would fall when releasing it from a height of 2,000 meters. Even if they were to add some extra weight, it still wouldn't work. Trying to reduce their altitude, however, meant they would then easily be discovered. After all, Cloud Gazer's size was just too big. If that was coupled with the stream leaflets dropping from the sky attracting the eyes of the crowd below, it would become very difficult for them to hide. Therefore, His Royal Highness had decided to cancel the leaflet part in the end. Instead, he had shifted the task to Theo so as to inform the public of the news, that they were the ones who had thrown a bomb at the palace. Wendy manipulated the airflow so that the basket came to a halt above King's City. "Everyone ready? Pull up the valve," Lighting said while nodding. Then, she could only hear a loud humming sound as the heavy bomb started moving away from the basket, falling straight down to the ground. As the weight suddenly reduced, the hot air balloon began to fly upwards. Regarding the following step, she had already knew them by heart for a long time. Under the airflow caused from it dropping down, the parachute at the end of easterly wind number 1 opened, and so Lightning could easily catch up with the bomb. She then began correcting its trajectory a little at a time. The witches of the Witch Union weren't unfamiliar with King's City at all. When they'd moved westwards on their journey to the Holy Mountain, they had hidden themselves within the city's slums for several months. One of the reasons for this was to gather food and another was to attract new blood, during which time Soraya and Echo had come to join the Witch Cooperation Association. Although Lightning hadn't experienced it herself, but she had often listened to them speaking about this. Compared to other cities, King's City was very strict in implementing witch hunts. On top of the flight of steps at the outer city's public square, witches would be executed almost every month. As a result, they had stayed there for the shortest amount time, because with every day that passed, they would have to suffer the pain of seeing another sister pass away. Therefore, Lightning had no favorable impression of this bustling capital city. If she could end the rule of the person responsible for it by dropping a bomb on top of their head, she would be glad to do so. If Roland was the one ruling the kingdom of Grey Castle, all those tragedies would never have happened, isn't that right? She now had the chance to correct this error. Under the whistling sound of the wind, the scene below continued to expand, and soon, the details of the palace at the middle of the inner city started becoming clear to Lightning's eyes. Compared to the size of the living places of the commoners, the palace was many times larger. Its main buildings were made up of a dome, a banquet hall, and a tall castle tower. The rest were auxiliary buildings such as stables, barracks, warehouses and so on. Taking into account the steep walls of the castle, the roof structure was very complex, and not very usable for the impact detonator. Thus His Highness had decided that the Imperial Palace's hall would be the target of the attack. As the height dropped sharply, the parachute quickly reached the point of detachment. Lightning pulled the release mechanism, and let the parachute separate from the bomb, then picked it up and quickly began rising towards the sky. Before their departure, Prince Roland had repeatedly told her that she had to rise high enough and reach a safe position before the bomb hit. By no means should she ever turn around or go and take a look at the explosion, but the young girl was still tempted by her curiosity, and was unable to restrain the impulse to lower her head. Only to see a dazzling flash of light rise from the top of the hall and rapidly expand in all directions. The incandescent light quickly turned into a bright orange red, only to be followed by a rolling cloud of smoke and dust which slowly faded out. This process lasted only 1 instant before suddenly an ear-splitting sound of an explosion bombarded her ears, almost making her lose her balance. Lighting really wasn't inexperienced with the booming sound of artillery barrage on a battlefield, but compared to those terrible weapons which could shoot iron balls, the sound of easterly wind number 1's explosion would be 10 times louder. Smoke spurted out of the windows and between the pillars of the palace hall, engulfing the surrounding garden and gallery. Soon, several cracks appeared on the round dome which had been at the center of the impact. Lightning couldn't help but stop and hold her breath as she took in the last moments of the hall. Those countless black cracks wantonly flowed in all directions like ink, and instantly covered the entire roof. Then, as the roof was no longer able to support itself, it came crashing down, and raised an even stronger cloud of smoke. Under easterly wind number 1's amazing might, the palace hall finally collapsed. Chapter 308 Fear. In recent days, Theo had kept in daily contact with Prince Roland. In spite of the many incredible things he had seen during the last year he had worked for His Royal Highness, this new order felt a bit inconceivable and had also left him feeling puzzled. Announce the attack on the imperial palace as Roland Wimbledon's punishment on Timothy Wimbledon? At the time the militia which had attacked the Western Territory returned to King's City, he had naturally also heard of the warning that they had brought along with them. However, Theo had merely thought that it was His Highness' bluff, or perhaps a plan to threaten the East and strike the West, getting Timothy to increase the defenses while he sent out troops to attack other cities. Just like Garcia had done, going out to loot one of the enemy's cities before the approaching winter. But the following orders sent from Border Town gave him the impression that he'd been mistaken. In fact, it seemed that His Highness really did intend to attack King's City, and had thus asked him to be ready to spread some propaganda. This latest command had made it clear that the attack would be launched on the first day of autumn, at exactly the same time as announced in the warning message. Taking a look at this sentence, the attack on the imperial palace could be considered as punishment. In other words, His Highness would forcefully enter the King's City inner city, but how could that be possible? King's City possessed Greycastle's mightiest city walls, with a thickness that could accommodate 2 houses set side by side, which even for His Highness's artillery would be difficult to destroy. Furthermore, with the kingdom's best knights, personal guards, as well as the enlisted militia as defenders, it would be hard to set even one step into the city without already having an army that was more than 10,000 people strong. Even using witches to initiate surprise attacks would have a similar outcome. Within the imperial palace there were as many God's stone of retaliation as there were hairs on an ox. In addition, in the palace's grand hall and in the other parts of the palace all had giant god stones of retaliation installed in them. So as soon as a witch set even 1 foot inside the room, she would immediately be stripped of all her powers. This was also the reason why Timothy could hunt and kill witches wantonly while being fearless of any retaliation. Wishing to ever assassinate a member of the royal family was simply an unattainable dream. Furthermore, even if there was a method, it still held some hidden dangers to it. If Timothy Wimbledon really was to die under a witch's hand, most likely the church would be the party to receive the greatest benefit. With only a little bit of guidance, they could start to claim that the 4th prince, a pawn of the devil's minions, would sit on the throne, which would result in all of the other nobles unifying against him. But Theo believed that a person like His Royal Highness already possessed enough intelligence to see hidden dangers such as that. So, in the end, how will His Highness get into and attack the inner city? Sir, what kind of instruction do you have for me to come over? Opening the half-closed door, Hill Fox walked into the living room. We are waiting for a new order, Theo said and spread out his hands, so go and take a seat first. Yes. Theo could only smile helplessly when he saw the flabbergasted expression on the former member of the acrobatic group. Usually he would only inform these people when he had received precise orders, but this time, it would be inconvenient for him to inform them of His Highness' mission ahead of time, in case they were unable to launch the attack on the imperial palace. This seemingly absurd instruction could easily reduce the other party's level of trust. But on the contrary, if His Royal Highness was able to be true to his claim, it would become an unprecedented shock to them, which could also greatly enhance the confidence of these people, especially if they could see with their own eyes that His Highness was able to shake Timothy's throne even from 1,000 miles away, and thus cause a real threat to the throne. Compared to spreading propaganda from mouth to mouth, this kind of action would be several times more effective. So, Theo chose to go with a compromise and called Hill over to the house in the inner city before waiting for His Highness to fulfill his warning. If they were successful, it would naturally be to everyone's delight, but if they failed, he just had to lie and say that the messenger had been delayed during the journey. Have some tea, Theo offered laughingly. Don't always show your doubt all over your face. As an intelligence officer, the most important thing is to mask yourself, sir. He took the cup in response. Oh, by the way. Recently there have been much more patrols visible on the streets, even the guards defending the city wall have been doubled. Don't tell me, do these maneuvers have something to do with His Highness' order? Indeed, Timothy. Just half of Theo's words had left his mouth, as a sudden clap of thunder from above rolled over the mansion. A sound that was so loud and clear that the glass in the windows began to tremble. At the same time, the ground also began to faintly shake with distinct tremors for a short duration. As he was caught off guard, Hill's hands began to shake, the teacup fell to the ground, breaking into several pieces. "I'm sorry, sir. But," Hill stuttered stupefied, "what just happened?" "Come with me," Theo ordered, wearing an earnest expression. The moment they ran out of the residence and entered the garden, their gazes was immediately attracted to a pillar of black smoke that was rising from the palace. Apparently, that was where the thunder had come from. Theo had experienced when cannons and firearms released their might. He naturally knew that only the alchemist's fine powder could give rise to this sound of heaven's anger. What's more, such a violent tremor was unlike anything that an artillery bombardment could have caused. Instead, it was more like those explosive packages they had originally used to deal with the heavy armored demonic beasts. Hill stood beside him, his mouth opened wide and unable to believe what his eyes were telling him. Could it be that His Highness declared warning was real? That's right, Theo was finally able to control his racing heart. He turned, pretending to be profound as he stated, "This is the new order His Highness wants me to give you." Asterisk. Timothy could only look on with an ashen face as the chandelier fell in front of his eyes, and was struck speechless for a long time. "Your Majesty, Kiki. Are you all right, sire?" The Imperial Prime Minister said coughingly from somewhere from within the dust that had flew up and was filling the whole sky. "What the hell just happened outside?" Timothy didn't answer, he merely felt a terrible pain in his throat. The chandelier just now had fallen on top of a silver-armored knight. At that time, the man had still been in the process of giving a report of the refugees that were enlisting, yet his neck had been broken by the chandelier. "If I had gone one step further, I am afraid I would." Thinking until here, all the hair on his back stood up straight. "Is this an earthquake?" The finance minister said, still locked in a panicked state, "We have to get out of the castle and reach an open place." "That's right, Your Majesty, it isn't safe here." "Everyone shut up!" Timothy shouted. The moment he opened his mouth, however, he discovered that his voice had turned hoarse, becoming difficult to understand, as if he was speaking while pinching his own throat. "Sir Weimer, take me to the basement immediately." "Yes, Your Majesty." Although he looked a bit nervous, but compared to the performance of several other ministers, he could still be regarded as very calm. He immediately walked over and helped Timothy up, then they walked together the stairs leading further down. Along the way, the new king saw that the aisle was covered with pieces of shattered glass and also that the blue dome of heaven behind the damaged windows had ceased to exist. In the midst of the still soaring smoke and dust, only a few pillars from this former magnificent building could still be seen. This wasn't caused by an earthquake, but by an explosion caused by a large amount of snow powder. "If I leave the castle now, I would undoubtedly step on my own path of doom. Only God knows where Roland has buried snow powder. I'm only safe behind the thick walls of the basement." Damn it, Timothy thought hateful, how on earth can my brother be in possession of such an alchemic weapon? Could it be, before her departure of Clearwater, Garcia had given him the formula, so that he could use the snow powder to make both sides suffer? But even then, how was he able to bring the snow powder inside of the palace? Even with the ability of an extraordinary witch, it still wouldn't have been possible. "Take some knights along with you and thoroughly search the whole palace. Especially the sewers, gardens, and warehouses, anywhere that it would be easy to hide snow powder." Timothy immediately ordered toward Knight Steelheart after reaching the basement. "If you find any suspicious character, noble or commoner, immediately arrest them. All attendants and servants who enter or leave the palace should be thoroughly searched. None of them can be spared." "As you bid, Your Majesty." After Sir Weimer had left, the new king discovered that his back was now covered in cold sweat. Roland has actually done it. Regardless of how he had done it. Since he could hide the snow powder inside the palace this time, does that mean that he can reach the castle as easily as turning his hand the next time he comes? "Your position is not as safe as you think, everyone will see that your throne is already crumbling." Recalling the words of the warning, Timothy could not help but shudder. As his anger gradually subsided, he felt fear come rising from the soles of his feet. Bit by bit it was taking hold of his heart. Chapter 309, The Exploration of Knowledge. On the second day of autumn, Roland finally received a letter from King's City. Since the letter sent came via a flying messenger, it was most likely written by his personal guard Theo. Freeing the paper from the bird's claw, Roland stepped over to the window, using the radiant and enchanting sunshine to carefully read through it. Because the palace was quickly blocked and no one was allowed to enter or leave, I wasn't able to scout out the damage caused by the explosion. But within the evening almost all of King City's inhabitants knew of the attack on the palace, whether it be in the pub, the inn or the city squares. Wherever people gathered there was only one topic of discussion. Even the death of the former king hadn't caused such a sensational impact. In addition, since you've given a warning beforehand, there are now many people who believe that Timothy has already died from this attack and they believe you will soon start ruling over King City from there becoming the new king of the Kingdom of Grey Castle. This paragraph allowed Roland to feel thoroughly relieved. There could be no better news for him than to hear that the bombing mission had been successfully carried out, and that the witches would be safely returning soon. He made himself a cup of tea before returning to the side of the mahogany table and continuing to read the letter. However, according to the collected information, at present, there isn't any sign of activity from the several big nobles outside King's City. Furthermore, the royal palace has also responded very quickly, so I speculate that Timothy Wimbledon is still likely to be alive. In addition, there are some people who swear that this attack had come from the sky. In the end, there seems to be some residents who've witnessed an unremarkable colored object drop from the sky, falling with utmost speed onto the imperial palace. Therefore, I have already come up with an initial plan regarding the task you've handed me. If I could actually embellish this matter into heaven's punishment against the fake king, I think that many of the people will believe it to be the truth. Regarding this, the hands under my control are full of enthusiasm. During daytime, they've collected information concerning all of Timothy's tyrannical practices. If this was to be mixed in with the story, it would surely become even more effective. I believe that it won't even be a month before the street rats spread this news to the ears of all of the citizens. In addition, I will continue to closely monitor the movements of the Eastern Barracks. But looking at the current situation, Timothy still doesn't seem to have come up with any countermeasures to resist the attack, so it seems that he doesn't have any time to care about anyone else. The letter was again not signed at the end. After reaching its end, Roland folded the letter and put it into the drawer before releasing a deep and long breath. In case Easterly Wind No. 1 really has stopped Timothy from dispatching troops, the result would already be very good. After all, the large number of drugged people consumed during a fight was indeed too wasteful. The later the other side launched its battle of attrition, the more opportunities Roland could get to win over the population. Roland raised the cup and drank a mouthful of fragrant black tea. For now, the next thing he needed to do was to rest and wait for the witches to return. It was already several days since he had last seen Anna, and there was also nobody who stole any of the dried fish out of the drawer. All in all, this made him feel a bit uncomfortable. At this moment, Carter opened the door to the office. "Your Royal Highness, 2 fleets have arrived at the pier." "Has Margaret's Chamber of Commerce finally arrived?" Taking into account the time she had spent on the road, she must have missed a good show. "Hold on," Roland stopped for a moment, feeling slightly surprised. "You said there were 2 fleets?" "Yes," Carter said laughingly. "You remember the messenger group you had sent to the Southern Territory to recruit staff? A batch of troops has already come back. The number of refugees that they brought along with them is already enough to crowd the pier to its bursting point. Currently, the City Hall is carrying out your plan and Miss Lily is executing the quarantine operation." Right, you're talking about the program to eliminate the existence of plagues or similar threats." The chief knight coughed twice. "This group of people number about 400 or 500 people in size." "Do they?" Roland couldn't prevent the corner of his mouth from rising. "It seems as if it was just moments ago when we spoke about the possibility of this matter, but now it's already started to show results. It seems as if the number of temporary houses Lotus needs to prepare has increased yet again. Let's go and take a look." Asterisk. Kalsichi put down the extremely thin remaining section of the intermediate chemistry while repeatedly muttering, "So that is what it is." "Mentor?" Chavez asked anxiously. Since the time he had received the intermediate chemistry, Kyle had been unable to find any sleep within the last 2 days, almost reading through the whole ancient book overnight. Chavez himself had also taken a few glances at it, but the book's content was too abstruse and much too difficult to understand. "I'm fine," the chief alchemist's voice didn't contain any trace of weariness, instead it appeared as if his spirit was trembling with excitement. Even though the corner of his eyes may have contained some dirt, his two eyes were still bright and full of fire, and looked nothing like a person who had just gone through a sleepless night. The times when the mentor delved into alchemy, they mustn't be easily disturbed. This was a rule which each disciple need to abide by. So, having waited until now, Chavez finally dared to open his mouth and speak. This disciple doesn't understand what is an atom, and what is an electron. You are already a qualified alchemist, so you mustn't call yourself a disciple. According to His Highness, we are colleagues now. Cal paused. As for your question, I do not know how to answer it. In fact, when His Royal Highness Roland gave me the intermediate chemistry, this book was also attached to it. Chavez looked at another book on the table. On the cover was written, Theoretical Foundations of Natural Science. Sichi. Mentor, he wasn't accustomed to using such a familiar form of address yet. It looks as if it closely follows alchemy. No, it completely lacks any relation with chemistry. I also thought the same, Cal said while stroking his beard. He sighed, then continued to speak. However, after reading through a few pages, I discovered that I have actually been totally ignorant of this world. What? Chavez was stunned. Alchemy is the study of the composition of substance, the essence of elements. If they could be considered as knowing nothing about it, then what difference was there between other people and monkeys? I mean the concept behind it. The chief alchemist's voice was full of excitement, and also satisfaction. We think that alchemy is just alchemy, that it is the research of scholarly knowledge. We say to ourselves that the sun rising and falling, and the flowers blooming and fading are things which have no relation to us. Isn't that right? Those who are good at observing the sun and the stars become astrologers. As for the plants, Chavez was slightly disgusted, only farmers and herbalists would study them. That's why we know nothing at all. Cal shook his head. From the beginning, this book tried to connect everything together, whether they be stones, flowers, thunder, or fire, all are made up of the same thing, all follow the same set of rules. Not only does chemistry react according to these rules, even the sun rises and falls and the flowers bloom and fade according to it. This rule is so precise, that as long as the conditions are the same, the result will also always be exactly the same. Chemistry is only a small part of this. How can this be? I also find it hard to imagine. He unfolded the periodic table of elements. In intermediate chemistry, it describes the form of these elements, one big ball surrounded by numerous smaller balls. The big ball decides which kind of element it is, and the number of balls in the outer ring determines the characteristics of the element, and this very list is arranged according to this law. There is neatly lined up as a parade of soldiers. Now, I also fully understand the meaning of His Highness, why we can, without ever having seen or come into contact with this element, are still able to deduce its properties and reactions. Because even the smallest reaction, like the loss or addition of those small balls, won't involve any changes to the big ball at all. This is also the reason why elements don't disappear during a reaction, they will only ever transform. For a moment Chavez pondered about what he had heard and then asked, "Do you believe it? These theories are too misty, and they cannot be verified by the eye, so how are the people who wrote the book able to know of it?" "I do not know, so I cannot answer your previous question," Cal said while showing a smile, "but it doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. The key is that it provides a perspective I have never imagined before. In the end, it allows me to look at it through another door, and behind that door, there isn't only just chemistry." Speaking until here, his voice came to a stop. Unfortunately, His Royal Highness wasn't able to record everything. Perhaps he was unable to understand it himself, so who knows what he might have missed. Chavez wasn't able to comprehend everything he had heard, just like when he had become an apprentice. When he'd first heard the terms used by alchemists, it had been like hearing people speak in another language, and now, he once again had this feeling. But he wasn't worried. As long as he followed his mentor, he would be able to learn this so-called theory of all living things are interconnected. Compared to the chief alchemist, the thing he lacked the most now was time. After a moment of silence, Chavez asked, "But why did His Highness use different colors for the names of the books?" Showing an expression of surprise, the chief alchemist let out a cry, "Ah!" Then he said, "This is something I'd actually ignored. Could it be that he'd casually used them?" But he quickly shook his head. "No, if they were colored black and red it could be the case. But these types of colors are especially difficult to make, it is unlikely to be unintentional." In other words, His Highness deliberately used them? Elementary chemistry was blue, theoretical foundations of natural science was also blue, elementary mathematics was green, and intermediated chemistry, remnants, was written with purple paint. It didn't stand out when you looked at each of them alone, but if placed together, it was particularly eye-catching. Probably for appearance sake? Chavez guessed. Chapter 3:10 The Purified. Maine stood on top of an arched hillside, overlooking the city ahead of him from a distance. Last time, Wolfshart City's walls had looked far different from what it looked like now. The walls were built with stones from the kingdom of eternal winter, appearing clean and white, just like the teeth of a newborn wolf. However, within just 3 months' time, its appearance had been completely changed. Breakages had been filled with the local black boulders, and the gaps which they couldn't mend in time had been blocked with wooden palisades. The blood-soaked stone had lost its pure white color, and turned into a reddish-brown instead. Looking from the distance, the current walls looked rough and seemed to be covered with dirt, like wolf teeth that had experienced years of wind and frost. Compared with its prior appearance, they now looked more like the teeth of a ravening predator, like the time when they were tearing their prey apart, which was the most fearsome sight to humans. The church's army had set up their camp about 5 miles outside of Wolfshart City. In order to prevent the former Queen of Clear Water from raiding the old holy city, they hadn't brought along the same size as last time. The army of judges and the baggage teams were both around 5,000 people, while the God's Punishment army had a total of nearly 800 or so. However, with their secret siege weapon and the Purified, Maine had full confidence that they would be able to clear out this nest of wolves. "Your Excellency, the siege beast is in place and ready to attack." A priest came to the top of the hill to report to him. "What's the status of the Purified who are controlling it?" "They are also prepared to launch." Mayen lifted the observation mirror and looked toward the direction of the siege beast, only to see 2 fearsome steel beasts lying within the farmland 2 miles away from the city walls. Both sides were surrounded with obstruction boards and had a grass-covered roof over them. If you didn't take a careful look, it would be difficult to detect this ferocious weapon with its uncanny shape. Moving his line of sight forward, he saw a lineup of the God's Punishment army. These were the transformed soldiers of the church's most devoted believers, standing straight in the autumn wind, all of them motionless. Only when the enemy fought against them would they really be able to understand just how terrifyingly powerful these extraordinary warriors were. Unfortunately, they couldn't act autonomously and would only act according to the orders issued by the commander during battle. However, the commander has never appeared publicly in the church, and during battle would fight from within the ranks, disguised as a member of the God's Punishment army. So, except for the 3 archbishops and the Pope, there was no one who knew his true identity. "Very good," Maine said as he nodded in satisfaction. "Return to your position and wait for the attack horn to sound." "Yes, Your Excellency." His next task was to meet with the Purifieds that the Pope had sent. When he thought of those 2 witches, he could not help but frown. They were as different as black and white compared to the other witches of the church. Even during the march to fight they were still carrying on with their own things. If they were one of his own Purifieds, they would already have been punished with a flogging, but the position of these 2 and Archbishop Maine were on equal footing, so he wasn't allowed to direct them. His Holiness had only sent these 2 Purifieds to provide assistance during the battle, not to obey his orders. But he also knew, if he wanted to completely eradicate all of the hidden dangers, he was going to have to depend on their powers. The Archbishop went down the hill and stopped in front of a tent outside the camp. But when he opened the curtain, the bedstraws were unsurprisingly empty. "Zero and Isabella?" he asked the judge standing at the entrance. "The 2 ladies are currently interrogating the captives. They should be at the east side of the camp now, the judge said. There is a flat open space there, you can see it immediately when you get there. Or do you want me to go and call them back? If it would be enough to send you to call them, I wouldn't have needed to come here to begin with. But they are playing with the captives again, aren't they tired of playing? No, it's all right, I will look for them myself. He soon found the place the guard had told him of. Only to see two women stand in the center of a level ground. One of them was leaning forward, her head next to the ears of three prisoners whose hands were tied together, and whispering something to them. The expression on her face was gentle but focused, her white long hair and her robe was dancing in the wind, just like a flawless spirit. The other woman possessed an impressive figure and had a head full of golden curly hair, and from time to time she would release a sweet-sounding and clear laugh. Have the surrounding judges immediately vacate the area. Maine instructed his personal guard to send instruction to the presiding judge. The same is true for the people responsible for looking after the captives. Tell them that there is no more need for them to look after them. As you bid. At this moment, the blonde witch also noted their arrival. She informed her partner and quickly walked over. Your Excellency, the blonde witch said while giving a slight bow, why did you drive the audience away? The trial was just about to begin. Ms. Isabella, he nodded back, the all-out attack on Wolfshart City is about to begin, so interrogating the prisoners has become meaningless now. Furthermore, these people can't tell us more than the other spies we've caught along the way, and that was only a pathetic amount of news. If possible, I hope you and Zero can immediately rush over to the front line. Don't worry, since we are already here, we couldn't let such an important enemy just walk away, Isabella said while spreading out her hands. As for the trial, there is nothing I can do to stop her. How about, you can just act as the audience, it won't take them that long anyway. The same as before? Well, the rules will be basically the same, she laughed. Zero really likes this kind of game. If it's like that, then quickly get started. Damn it. Even though Maine's face became expressionless, inwardly he was burning with anger. Speaking of this judgment game, it would be more appropriate to look at it as a cat playing with a mouse. The captives had to escape a predefined range or defeat the witch. Only by doing this could they obtain a slim chance of survival, and this chance to live was extremely slim, but the bait was still good enough to lure out the mouse. It already seemed difficult to achieve, but in fact, it was something they would never be able to reach. The reason for scattering the judges who were responsible for safeguarding and monitoring the purifieds was that the upcoming process couldn't be considered as entirely fair or just. The others' action wasn't in accordance with the behavior of purified, so seeing this, he was afraid that it might waver their faith in the church. Just wait until I take over the position of the Pope, at that time I will have to teach them the importance of obediently following orders. At this moment, Zero had already freed the prisoners from the ropes and spread out her hands to show that she wasn't wearing any weapon on her body. While in front of the prisoners there laid a sword, a machete, and a light crossbow. Come on, fight or run, just follow your hearts, Zero said with a gentle tone. Only God can issue a ruling. One of them clenched his teeth, then suddenly picked up the crossbow from the ground and directly shot an arrow at the purified. Not even looking whether he had hit, his other hand had already taken hold of the sword as he tried to seize the opportunity to rush forward and chop out horizontally. This whole set of actions were executed in one smooth movement, clearly a skill that was impossible for militia. However, the captive cut through nothing but empty air. The purified had simply taken 2 steps back and easily avoided the surprise attack. When the captive came to a stop and raised his head, he couldn't suppress a short flicker of surprise when he saw that the other was holding the arrow with her teeth, as if she was chewing on a harmless branch. Zero spit out the arrow, waved at the captive, and with a smile, she said, "Please, carry on." The captive stared blankly at her, his hands trembling slightly. Maine could see that all the courage he'd gathered with such difficulty had already left him again. Even if the fight were to continue, it would only last for one more exchange. Sure enough, after hesitating for a moment, the captive raised his head and roared like a wild boar. Then raised his sword and darted toward the unarmed woman. But this attempt was too stiff. Even with closed eyes, Maine could guess at the result. just within his half-a-lunar cycle-long contact with Zero, Mayne had already become aware that her powers were almost limitless. Even though she wasn't an extraordinary, she still possessed innate battle skills not inferior to them. These skills weren't in her supernatural strength or resistance, but rather in her extremely skillful technique. Even if she couldn't use any magic, she was still a dreadful enough soldier. The witch moved her body slightly to the side, easily avoiding the opponent's hack. Then her pair of seemingly fragile hands clamped the prisoner's head, and using his forward momentum, she softly moved it. This slight flick only released a light cracking sound, but as if the other side had suddenly lost all the bones in his body, he immediately became limp and fell to the ground. She turned her head and looked to the two remaining captives, then said, "Now, it's your turn." Chapter 311 War of Mortals, Part 1. Seeing this scene, one of the other prisoners turned and ran away, which caused Zero to look somewhat disappointed. She turned into a ray of light and entered the fleeing captive's body, who immediately stopped his steps. The captive's eyes turned white, and his body began to undergo strange changes. This wasn't Mayne's first time seeing such a scene, but no matter how often he saw it, he couldn't prevent a chill from arising within his heart. A dim ray of light burst out from within the captive's body, and his body began to twist and deform until finally changed into the very appearance of the purified who had entered him. He knew that this wasn't a simple act of replacing and slaughtering, but what exactly happened during this transformation process, Mayne was afraid that only the Pope or the people involved could fully understand. Zero took a deep breath and went back to the last prisoner. He was the youngest of 3 captured spies, probably only 14 to 15 years old. His young and inexperienced eyes were filled with shock and fear, unable to accept what had happened just now. "Now, you're the only one left," she whispered, "Heir." Hearing these words, the trembling boy who had originally wanted to pick up the machete froze in shock and started to stammer, "How? God told me everything. Actually, you were merely a farmer's child living in the outskirts. But because of the Wolf King's order, you and the other village people were forced to move into the city, and became responsible for repairing the city walls, creating the military supplies, transporting the army's provision, and so on. In other words, forced labor. Instead of letting you go because of your young age, they rather decided to recruit you into the investigation troops. In reality, they planned for you to emerge and perish on your own." She reached out and touched his cheeks. "The best evidence for this is that at the time you sent back the intelligence about the large military operation of the church, the captain of the guards didn't even let you enter the camp. Instead, after listening to your report, he immediately sent you back to us, right?" Heir opened his mouth, but couldn't find any words. "Of course, they couldn't let you enter, because your family had already ceased to exist. Your parents were accepted, while your brother was the same as you, merely consumables for the Wolf King. So, if you were allowed to return, wouldn't it make all the other scouts know about it?" Zero said, "Your father fell to his death while trying to fill a gap in the wall. Your mother, trying to find the workplace overseer, had to suffer punishment with a whip and is now on the verge of death. In a world where God doesn't examine everything, evil always wantonly flows around like sewage. Are you sure you really want to fight for such a ruler?" The young boy stared with wide eyes at her, unable to mask his sorrow. "This is impossible, you're lying to me." "God never lies," the purified shook her head. "And in the bottom of your heart, you know that I'm telling the truth. The root of all this evil is the nobility. They never regarded you as one of their own kind, they merely see you as livestock. What the church is trying to do is to put an end to all this evil and injustice. They want to build a new world under the care and watchful eyes of God." With a plopping sound, Heir sank to his knees, lowered his head and began to cry bitterly. "What should I do?" "Follow your heart, only God can issue the ruling." He choked with sobs and said, "I was wrong. I am willing to tell you everything I know. I will do anything I can to save my mother." Such a clever child. Zero patted his head, then took out a plant with slender leaves from her pocket and held it in front of him. "Eat this, and you will have a good sleep. It will also help you stabilize your mood." She tore off half a leaf, put it into her mouth, and began to chew, before saying, "Just like me. Wait until tomorrow, after breaking through the walls of Wolfshart City you might be able to see your mother again. Mayne puckered his brows. The peacefully sleeping bracken was something used in the making of dream water. It didn't show any effect on witches, but when taken by ordinary people it was a very severe poison, which required that they intake the winter flower to neutralize its toxicity. Sure enough, after eating it, it didn't take long until the prisoner's face turned ashen. He forcefully gripped his throat, and looked with an expression of absolute disbelief at the smiling purified, only able to release some incomprehensible awk-awk sounds. His own fingernails quickly tore open his skin and blood vessels before the blood that came splashing out dyed his neck bright red. His painful struggle continued for half an hour until his body gradually turned limp and he finally stopped breathing. "It's such a pity that God didn't forgive your sins," Zero said while smiling. Then she walked over toward the Archbishop and bowed in greeting. "Your Excellency, how do you feel about the trial? Did it have the same elegant manner of excellency, Heather? Why must you deceive him into eating the peacefully sleeping bracken?" Mayne asked with a heavy tone. "If it had been Heather, we could have added one devout believer to our ranks. Rather than making him kill himself while thinking he is moving back on the right path. If the situation of the captive's loved ones were like I had said, I would naturally have recruited him as a believer, but unfortunately I do not know what really happened to his parents. Those words of mine were nothing more than me talking nonsense," she said in a carefree voice while shrugging. "The moment he discovers that my words were all lies, he would obviously turn against the church. Believe me, I serve the church wholeheartedly." "If you served the church wholeheartedly, you would have properly waited for my orders in the tent," Mayne thought while impatiently turning his head and stating, "The attack will begin soon. You must immediately prepare yourself and move according to the plan. The Wolf King and the Queen of Clear Water must die, Your Excellency," the Purified said. "If it was me alone, I might not have been able to do it. But since even Isabella has come with me, they absolutely won't be able to run away. Asterisk. Woo-woo dash." The bugle horn's trumpet, which was the signal to attack, rolled across the horizon. Under the pressuring dark clouds and in the middle of the rustling autumn wind, it raised the curtain to the second act of the siege against Wolfshart City. 1 mile away, the frame of the siege beast that launched the spears gave out rays of magical light. The moment the light was as bright as the sun, the iron spear suddenly burst straight toward the walls. Flying as though it had been thrown by a giant's hand, it reached a speed that made it difficult to sight, and a moment later was followed by an ear-splitting roar. After crossing such a long distance, the spear had hardly lost any of its might. The moment it hit the wall, it crushed the stone into powder. Even the house-sized boulders were easily pulverized and the soldiers standing behind the wall were coincidentally also shot dead. After merely 3 rounds of fire, the city gate was completely smashed, and the surrounding walls utterly broken. Even though the firing rate of the Devil's siege weapon was equivalent to an ordinary catapult, its range was several times further. Against this kind of offensive, it was absolutely impossible for the garrison force to try and strike back. Unable to see the trajectory of the launch, they weren't even able to determine where the next attack would be hitting. The church's army hadn't moved, yet the defensive line was already in imminent danger. Just then, a world-shaking loud boom suddenly sounded behind the wall. Seeing a massive fireball soar into the sky, the people on the battlefield all felt the earth starting to shake beneath their feet. Then, accompanied by black smoke and fire, the wall collapsed with a loud rumble, finally creating an opening in this mottled wolf's tooth. The sharp horn sounded again. The mixed forces composed of the army of judges and God's punishment army initiated their charge against the city wall. Looking at it from afar, they looked like a flowing reddish-gold ocean, mercilessly swallowing everyone who even dared to stand against it. Now Wolfshart's defenders would have to rely on their own flesh and blood in order to withstand these soldiers who stood apart from the mortal world. Chapter 3:12 War of Mortals, Part 2. Mortals cannot defeat the devils, Isabella thought to herself, therefore the church created the God's punishment army. They possess considerable strength, feel no pain, and know no fear, making them the best weapon against the devils. Although they don't possess the ability to act on their own, that isn't necessarily a disadvantage in battles between armies. Against such a powerful force, a garrison of mortals naturally would never be able to resist. Especially after losing the backing of their city wall, seeking to beat the church's elite force in a melee fight is nothing less than a wishful dream. Like a powerful golden current, the army of judges dashed through the main gate of Wolfshart City's wall, entering hand-to-hand combat against all of the assembled defenders. The red-colored God's punishment army looked as if they were walking on level ground as they climbed over the collapsed city wall and started to massacre those who attempted to stop the flood of enemies. "Do you want to go and help them?" Isabella asked after turning towards Zero. The latter yawned and then said uninterested, "No, my magic is limited, so I have to save it for the important targets." "You could just use the sword, hammer, or crossbow to fight." Isabella said, feeling displeased. "No matter what, they wouldn't be able to beat you." Zero shook her head. "If I go, they will easily win. If I don't go, they will still easily win. There is no point in doing it, so I don't want to." "Alright," she changed the subject. "Why did you do that before?" "Why? While you were playing with the prisoners, the bishop's face was stiff for the whole time," said Isabella. "It seems that he doesn't appreciate your kind of trial, and also he is the most likely candidate to be the next pope. When that time comes you might suffer a lot." "The reason why Excellency Maine becomes angry is only because he hasn't become the pope yet," Zero said carelessly. "When he goes into the library at the top of the pivotal secret temple, he will come to understand that my way of handling things is exactly the way in which to please God." "What way of handling?" "Playing with." The purified ran her hands through her hair to tidy the mess created by the wind. "God has never descended on the world, he also doesn't protect his people. Only by having a single illusory objective can we guarantee to take over when someone else fails to reach it, in hopes of receiving his favor. Doesn't this concept resemble the trial I just held? I at least provided him with a real objective, something that God never will. It isn't even guaranteed that his objective is realistic or whether everything is our own crazy raving. Yet even with so much uncertainty, we still dash onward with no thought to our personal safety. TSK, it is truly the most thorough play. What's this woman talking about? Why can't I understand one word?" Isabella knitted her brows and asked confused, "Have you ever been to the library?" "No," she shrugged her shoulders. "These were words His Holiness O'Brien had said to me. He isn't a witch, and his lifespan is already approaching its end. I heard that when mortals reach their end, they will start to reminisce on their life and will always hope to find someone to talk to about it. He even wants to let me swallow him before his death." "You can't." "Of course I mustn't, that would make Excellency Maine furious," Zero interrupted. "Rest assured, I know what I'm allowed to do and what not." A mysterious smile played around her lips. "There is another possibility." "What will happen if I lose?" "Can't I then offer up my body as a present to him?" "I don't think so. If you lose, chances are that nothing is going to happen." Isabella sighed. This woman is a strange one, probably because of her ability. After swallowing so many people, it's very hard for her to find something she hadn't experienced yet. Which leads to her seldom being interested in anything and instead is simply doing everything for the sake of pleasure. Furthermore, only an unusual pleasure will suffice. Isabella moved her line of sight back to the battlefield. A group of desperados suddenly appeared from the gaps in the city wall and started charging into the ranks of the God's punishment army. Most of them came to a screaming end at the end of a spear, but there were still a few who managed to slip through the net. The sound of explosions began to rise, followed by smoke rising to cover all of the gaps within the wall. This should be the new alchemy weapon which started to appear during the last siege, she thought. It seems quite powerful, thus it would be a good choice to use it against the demonic beasts. But using it in an attempt to deal with the God's punishment army is just a quick way to commit suicide. If it weren't for those pills, they would never even have dared to approach the soldiers of the God's punishment army. On the other side, the mighty current of the Golden Ocean slowed as raging flames suddenly emerged on the path through the city gate, isolating the soldiers who had already entered the city from the judges still standing in front. Some people who were caught by the flames desperately started to roll over the ground to try and extinguish the flames, but it was to no avail. The amount of the god's stone of retaliation has increased exponentially behind the gates. There are even 2 high-quality stones present. It seems as if someone important has come. Isabella opened her mouth. That being the case, let's go and end it, Zero said, and leisurely stretched her waist. But those 2 are neither the Wolf King nor the Queen of Clear Water, Isabella informed while glancing at the city. The most intense reaction is still inside the castle. Are you sure you want to go? Isn't the army in trouble? Winning easily and winning miserably isn't the same. I still have to help His Holiness O'Brien reduce the losses. Zero tilted her head and continued in an earnest tone, just like I said before, I serve the church wholeheartedly. It was already afternoon when Wolfshart City's defensive line finally broke under the siege warfare. After the soldier of the God's punishment army got control over the city gate, the army of judges began to chase the enemy's soldiers through the streets to clear up all the resistance. The targets have started to move, Isabella said after looking toward the direction of the castle. It seems they intend to go to the river dock. Those 2 people who had come to organize the resistance at the wall and city gates were the Wolf King's sons. And now, through the information she gathered after swallowing both of them, Zero further confirmed that the 2 moving god stones of retaliation with the highest reaction were indeed the primary targets of this mission. In addition, they had also taken care of a fallen witch who looked and dressed as if she was of a different tribe. After the death of the witch, the militia forces who dared to go against the God's punishment army suddenly reduced by a lot. They probably want to leave by ship, Zero said with a blooming smile. Let's go and complete the mission given to us by His Holiness. The action of the other side made it clear that they were very cautious. On their way toward the docks they changed routes several times, and when they finally arrived at the pier they didn't board one of those huge ships with black sails, but instead chose the small sloop of a merchant. But no matter how hard they tried to cover their whereabouts, in front of the constantly monitoring Isabella their movements were immediately exposed. The moment the Wolf King and the Queen of Clear Water boarded the deck of the ship, 2 people came over from the other side of the pier. There were 20 additional soldiers on top of the ship, most of them were personal guards. When they saw the 2 appear, they immediately knew that something was amiss without even needing to think about it. Thus everyone drew their weapon and jumped off the vessel, throwing themselves straight at the purifieds. It was once more time for Zero to display her superior fighting skills. She was empty-handed as she seized the sword of a personal guard and drew everyone in to start fighting against her. With every sword stroke she made an enemy collapse, her footsteps lithe and quick, with only a few people able to anticipate her next move. Whether it was a poke, strike, chop, or block, Zero always used the appropriate amount of strength and the trickiest angle to strike, and soon, more than a dozen personal guards were lying on the ground, everyone having been killed by one sword. The Wolf King pulled out the sword at his waist, ready to throw himself into a desperate fight. Isabella! Zero cried. I know, the latter immediately launched her ability, forming a circle of light that was only visible to the magic eye. Within Isabella's field of vision, the lightless domains formed by the god stone of retaliation appeared, each of them was trembling at a different frequency, like ripples on the surface of water. She controlled her field until it trembled at the same frequency, then connected it with the domain of the god stone of retaliation. Both sides of ripples immediately cancelled each other out, leading to the domain becoming level and smooth. At that moment, Zero immediately turned into a beam of light, and drilled herself into the Wolf King's body. The Wolf King began to twist before changing into the form of the purified. After seeing this, the Queen of Clear Water revealed an incredulous look. How can this be possible? Why are you able to use your power around the god stones of retaliation? Because the god stones of retaliation isn't what you believe, Isabella said while still smoothing out the ripples of her opponent's domain, but there isn't really a reason for you to know this, because your end has come. The moment her voice had fallen, Zero threw herself directly at Garcia. Chapter 313 The Battle of the Soul. She hadn't felt such a warm sunshine in a long time. Garcia stood in the garden and took in a deep breath, inhaling the smell of rosemary coming along the breeze. This was no longer the kingdom of eternal winter. Besides the forever frozen soil and the non-aromatic winter flower, that country in the extreme north really had nothing to offer. Within that castle's backyard, lumps of meat and pig guts would always be hung out to dry in the open air, making it impossible to get rid of the awful smell. This place was also not the port of clear water, with its familiar taste of salt and its moist air, where if she closed her eyes, she could hear waves breaking over the beach. This is the Palace of Grey Castle, she thought. But its appearance was somewhat different from what she remembered. Garcia sat down at the central flowered pond, gently caressing the slightly rough rocks. Back in her childhood, while playing hide-and-seek, she had fallen to the ground and fiercely hit her head against the stones on the side of the flower pond. Since then her father had ordered for all the stones to be broken into small pebbles. As a result, it was then impossible to hurt oneself when stumbling, but it had also become impossible to hide oneself behind them. At that time, she remembered that besides herself, Gerald and Timothy had also been present. Seeing their younger sister fall down, both of them had become very frightened. To coax her to stop her sobbing, one by one they'd made themselves fall and deliberately knocked their head against the stones at the side of the pond. Of course, afterward, they were ruthlessly beaten up by their father. It was a period in her life that Garcia thought she would never recall again. It was like a secret hidden beneath a tree, deeply buried in the earth. But now that she's returned to this familiar place, she discovered that the scenery hasn't faded in the slightest. After digging it out of the earth, it still appeared just as vivid and lifelike as in the past. It seemed as if everything has returned back to the time in her childhood. As it turns out, this is your world, an unknown voice sounded from behind her. As a resting place, it's a pretty good choice. Garcia turned around and saw a woman dressed in white coming from the direction of the flowered pond. She had a pair of light red eyes and long, snow-white hair. Her facial features were so delicate that they seemed to have been carved, and her voice was ethereal and melodious. All in all, she was like a god who had fallen into the mortal world. The face of the Queen of Clear Water completely darkened as she stated, "You are the church's witch." "My name is Zero, the word which doesn't suit me," she laughed. "I'm called a purified. My blood, and that of those fallen, is entirely different." "A purified?" "That's just the term the church uses for the toys they've raised," Garcia said coldly. "What kind of trick is this scenery? Does your ability allows you to create illusions?" She suddenly picked up a stone and squeezed it in her hand. "It's just an illusion. None of this will fool me." The Queen's cry traveled far, but the scenery remained entirely unaffected. When she opened her hand, she saw that the stone in her hand wasn't crushed. Instead, her skin was cut by its hard edges and corners. The pain bursting from the wound seemed clear and real. "It appears that you aren't completely unaware of witch abilities. That makes things much easier." Zero grasped the hem of her skirt and gave a slight bow. "Welcome to the world of consciousness. I call this place the battlefield of souls. It is here where we will carry out our fight. The winner gets everything, the loser loses all. Just as God proclaims in the Holy Book. Souls, battlefield." Garcia stared blankly, trying to digest what she had just heard when she suddenly felt a sharp pain coming from her lung. She didn't know from where the pike had come, but somehow Zero had directly thrust it into her chest. Her breathing immediately turned heavy. When she tried to open her mouth and shout, not even the smallest of sounds came out. Meanwhile, Zero turned the pike around and fiercely pulled it back. Blood came spraying out of the wound, soon covering half of her body. Garcia sank to her knees, trembling as she tried to cover her wounds, but due to the enormous blood loss, her consciousness had already begun to blur. The next moment she found herself standing at her former place in perfect condition. The shadow standing a few meters away from her, as she had never left her place to begin with. What happened? Garcia opened her mouth wide, taking in a deep breath. An illusion? Her hands were still fiercely pressing against her chest, and she could still feel an aching pain at the place the wound from a moment ago had been. Lowering her head, she saw a large spray of blood scattered around her feet. "This is the basic rule. One's consciousness isn't immortal," Zero explained, spreading out her hands. "The pain of every death will feel real to you. It will slowly consume your mental and physical strength, and when this sense exceeds your limits, it will be time for your eternal rest. Every time you die, your body will return to its original state. An average person can withstand at most 3 to 4 times. Of course, I have also seen a lot of determined individuals who managed to go through 7, 8, or even more deaths, she explained gently. Although I am looking forward to your performance, I can also understand if you give up. After all, the feeling of continuous death is an unbearable suffering. At this point, choosing to escape isn't a cowardly behavior, especially when the outcome has already been decided. Finished speaking with the dropped pike in her hand and a great sword on her back, she leaped forward and tried splitting Garcia apart. The latter stared with wide-open eyes. She is wearing a white gown, there is no way for her to hide such a huge weapon. All these weapons are coming out of thin air? Suddenly the other's words reappeared in her mind. This is your world. I call it the battlefield of souls. Once consciousness isn't immortal, everything is real to you. The great sword chopped down, but instead of cutting the former Queen of Clearwater in two, it slammed against a huge iron shield. Confronted with the huge unexpected rebound, Zero lost her grip on the sword as it flew into the air. At the same time her body was also forced a few steps back. Garcia, because of the great strength she'd used to deflect the heavy blow, fell to the ground. The end is already destined? She ground her teeth and sneered. Previously you said this is my world, didn't you? The moment the words fell, she popped up, and a crossbow suddenly appeared in her hand, immediately releasing the arrow at Zero. Simultaneously a crucifix raised up behind her and firmly trapped her body. In a flash the crossbow arrow drilled into the abdomen of the purified, immediately causing a suffering expression to appear on her face. After gasping twice, Zero opened her mouth. That surprised me, cough cough, as an ordinary person, just accepting this is already very hard, and not to mention using your own consciousness to retaliate. You just proved why the Queen of Clearwater is able to cause Maine so many headaches. Thank you very much for your praise, Garcia said while picking up the spear that had fallen on the ground. If it weren't for you talking too much I would never have been able to comprehend the wonders of the world of consciousness so quickly. Now, should I put some more holes in you? Zero laughed challengingly. For now, I'll let you do as you like. When Garcia stabbed her for the 10th time, the purified finally died. She had deliberately avoided piercing any of the fatal points, slowly moving from the hands and feet toward the abdomen. At first the purified had cried out miserably, but later on her voice had gradually started to break. Next, that animal should be restored to her original state, right? However, this is the Palace of Greycastle, it's my home ground. Since it is possible to change the environment and objects at will, I cannot lose. Sure enough, the body of the purified flashed in a white light. In the blink of an eye, all of her wounds had disappeared, and Zero once again opened her light red eyes. Garcia lifted the pike, readying to send her to her death once again, but suddenly everything changed. The hands bound to the crucifix easily broke the rope, kicked against the pike, then instantly appeared at Garcia's side and delivered a strike with her raised hand. Before Garcia could respond, she had already lost sense of her body. With a loud bang the headless body collapsed, yet the other's hands were still empty. How can this be? After her restoration, the Queen of Clearwater clutched her neck and took 2 steps back and felt somewhat uncertain. Just now, did she use her empty hands to cut off my neck? Seeing the broken hemp rope and the blood on her hands, it became apparent that the previous scene hadn't been an illusion. If you couldn't understand the nature of the world of consciousness, how could I get a real fight? Zero smiled and said, You seem very puzzled about how I got my hands out of the thick rope, isn't that right? In fact, this isn't so difficult to understand. The winner gets everything, the loser loses all. Among those people whom I've swallowed, there is a class of witches who are unusually powerful. Their might is boundless, their body is nimble, and they don't need to fear the effect of the God's stone of retaliation. You might not know of them, but the church has a particular term for them, extraordinary. She opened her hands. It is impossible to beat me by only using common methods. If you want to survive, you will have to double your effort. Now, it's my turn. Chapter 3:14 Annihilation. It was Garcia's first time experiencing the horror of an extraordinary. The weapon in her hand was obviously only an ordinary one-handed sword, but the burst of pressure from her every move seemed to absorb parts of her soul. Each blow that came raining down on her shield was as heavy as a strike from a two-handed sword. 2 or 3 blows later, Garcia could no longer even lift her arm and was hit on her chin by an upwards moving strike. After her restoration, the Queen of Clear Water thoroughly abandoned defense, and before she could second-guess herself, a ballista had already appeared in front of her body. She pulled the trigger. It wasn't an iron spear that she released, but several jars of black water. Reacting instinctively, Zero cut the jars apart, only to get showered in the black water. When the pieces of fire crystal hidden inside the jars came in contact with the air, they quickly began burning, and turned the whole area into a pillar of fire. However, it was still not guaranteed that this would work. After all, Zero could still use her speed, which far surpassed everything an ordinary person could ever achieve, to move around the flower pond while the ballista couldn't even turn around. Thus, Garcia had no other alternative than to rely on raising the stone walls embedded with spears to restrict the purified's movement. In addition, she turned the flower pots surrounding the pond into explosives by filling them with snow powder, and hid several pits into the ground, setting up a formation of deathly traps. After killing the other side several times like this, Garcia discovered that her breathing gradually became heavy, beads of sweat started running down her forehead, and waves of dizziness started to attack her mind, leaving her almost unable to keep standing upright. "Well done," the once again reborn Purified said. She wasn't taking advantage of Garcia's weakened state and was instead clapping her hands. "That you are able to do all this far surpasses my expectations. However, there is something I forgot to tell you. Even though you can use your consciousness to change the environment and venue in this world, it will consume a much larger amount of energy than creating completely new things. The amount is even similar to one's restoration. You should already be feeling the weakness and exhaustion taking over your body. Maybe after your next death, you will already fall into an eternal sleep." "Ah, that's still better than getting one's neck cut off," Garcia panted heavily, "but you seem to forget the screams you made when being burned by the evil fire. I do not think you'll be able to hold on any longer than me." After a moment of silence, Zero said, "Ever since I've become a Purified, the Church has given me a lot of support to improve my abilities. From increasing my knowledge to teaching me fighting skill, to feeding me with judges to improve my ability. Those judges, even knowing that they would be sacrificing themselves, were still glad to enter the battlefield of souls. Here, in the world of conscious, they honed my skills in life and death struggles, reassuring me that they accept their death before transmitting all of their insight and experiences to me." Garcia did not interrupt her words. Even if the other was stalling for time, she also needed a break. "I have swallowed up an extraordinary, and her strength was impressive. I nearly lost a battle of souls. But in the end, I relied on the devil's weapons to prevail over her and then got everything from her. Due to the different characteristics of magic, I can't actually turn into an extraordinary or use the abilities of the witches I swallow. However, here in the world of consciousness, these differences don't matter to me. In the last 200 years, I can't even remember the number of people I have swallowed, but there have only ever been a few individuals who could threaten me. All their pain, happiness, sadness, and delights they've had in their life became part of my own personal experience." She paused, "including their death." "What exactly do you want to tell me?" Garcia cautiously asked. "The difference between you and me," replied Zero calmly. "The assimilation of so many souls has made my will matchless. In case you want to know the number of death I can survive, I think I can bear at least hundreds of death by now. In that case, I will have to help you to verify it." She scoffed. But inwardly her heart sunk. When looking at her demeanor, it doesn't seem that she is merely bluffing. From the time at the pier, where she cleanly and easily killed all their personal guards, it could be seen that this Purified possessed fighting skills that went beyond her age. If that's the case, I need to use even more powerful weapons. Quickly, what can I think of that can easily kill even an experienced super witch? The Battle of Souls isn't a contest to decide who has the greater imagination, Zero said, as if she already seen through her. "You cannot make yourself impervious to sword and spear without foundation, nor can you summon the weapons which destroyed heaven and earth from the legends of ancient times. Things you cannot understand you also cannot create. what we have seen and understood is the key to success. Then I'll just cover the whole garden with strong snow powder, even you will be unable to avoid it, Garcia declared coldly. Even if I die, at least I will drag you down with me. Even if killing me doesn't have the least bit of importance? The purified looked at her with eyes full of pity. In that case, let me show you the real power of the church. Suddenly a red light appeared behind Zero and condensed into a ferocious-looking war chariot. Its shape had such extreme dimensions that it immediately crashed against the walls of the garden. To Garcia, the two sharp metal spears at the top of its head looked like the report given by one of the Wolf King's personal guards, a kind of never-before-seen ballista which was attacking the walls. Both its range or power are at unprecedented levels. Don't tell me that this monster in front of me is what the guard has been speaking about. Then she heard a loud hum. The thick and solid spear directly broke through the layer upon layers of barriers Garcia had set up, not even bothering to spend any power to tear her in half as she was immediately sent flying backward. As she flew she could see her own organs and blood being left behind. In unbroken succession, the war chariot continued to shoot those spears, thus soon after being restored, she again suffered the same death. She didn't even have enough time to create the snow powder and take the enemy down with her. Under the constant pain, her consciousness gradually became blurred, the earth began to shake, cracks appeared in the sky, lightning flashed, thunder rumbled, and the garden burst into a blazing fire. A strong will can only delay defeat, it cannot change the outcome. Close your eyes now, Zero said, you've held it for long enough, rest in peace. The moment her voice fell, the whole world broke apart. Is it over? Isabella curled her lips, shouldn't it be done in an instant? You've already changed back into your original appearance, but for quite a while now you haven't said a word. I thought you really failed this time. I found some fascinating things in her memory. Zero opened her eyes. This way of thinking makes me sigh. Oh? There are still things which can make you sigh. Isabella said carelessly, that kind of strange alchemy powder should be something you have found out, right? Well, the alchemist called it strong snow powder and the composition is quite simple. All the needed components are the most common things in the workshop. If it's like that, then let us go back to the Holy City to report. We have already fulfilled all the orders given by His Holiness O'Brien, she spat out. This battle will continue for at least 3 to 4 days, but now without a leader or witch to guide them, those remnants won't count as a threat to the gods' punishment army. Let's go, Zero nodded. Hold on, Isabella shouted for her to stop. What happened? Was it an illusion? Obviously, there's no change in her appearance from before. But why do I feel that the look from her light red eyes has become somewhat different? Isabella carefully studied her counterpart but then shook her head. No, it's nothing. I guess I'm just overthinking things. Chapter 3:15 Celebration Feast. A grand celebration banquet was being held in the main hall of Border Town's castle. In addition to the witches, the high-ranking staff in City Hall and the First Army all fully attended this feast. There were the nobles Bear of Mons and Carter Lannis, and also Iron Axe and Kyle Sichi who were from a civilian background. Especially for the latter, Roland had to spend a lot of effort to persuade him to come out of the laboratory and attend this according to him meaningless banquet. To include his subjects in this joyful event, besides giving a public speech, he'd also ordered the kitchen staff to bake a large amount of white bread by using the leftover refined starch from manufacturing explosives, and distribute the bread to all of the townspeople. As long as they were in possession of an identification card, they could get a limited amount of delicious food at the City Hall. Even while the First Army was on their way home, most of the town's inhabitants had already learned of their victory in battle. Of course, they may not necessarily understand the purpose and significance of the expedition, but as long as there was free bread it counted as a day of celebrate for them. This was also Roland's first time imitating those lofty banquets hosted in King City. There was no barbecue and no large pieces of stewed meat, all the food was cut into small pieces and splendidly arranged on spotlessly white plates. At the edge of the table stood several basins that contained all kinds of seasonings, so that they could flavor their food according to their own taste, similar to the buffets of later generations. Welcome back, Roland said, carrying 2 glasses of wine to Anna. The journey must have been hard for you. You already said that at the pier. Anna took 1 glass, and my answer is still the same, it wasn't hard. When their glasses faintly touched each other, her eyes were filled with a sweet smile. Seeing this, Roland had to struggle to resist the impulse to embrace her on the spot. Instead, he went on and exchanged a celebration cup with the other witches. What about me? Lightning shouted. You'll also get your share, Roland said, calling over a waiter from whom he then took a glass of cider for her. Work hard. I demand to drink white. The little girl looked at him with big eyes. After thinking about it, Roland finally decided to fulfill her wish. After all, this kid's curiosity had always been quite high, so if he refused her all the time, maybe she would learn from Nightingale and sneak into the kitchen, but she'd be stealing wine instead. Alright, but only 1 drink. Yeah. When Roland handed her a weak white wine mixed with ice and grape juice, she suddenly approached and gave him a kiss on his cheek. Kiki. Is this the custom from the fjords? Sure, Lightning nodded seriously, that's what my father told me. Because it wasn't the first time they saw it, the other witches of the Witch Alliance didn't feel that it was too strange. However, Sylvie's eyes became round from shock before throwing an accusatory glance at Roland, and saw he was moving along while wearing an awkward expression. Does there really exist such a custom of kissing the head when celebrating heroic deed in the fjords? Then it was time to exchange a toast with the ministers. When it came to the chief alchemist's turn, the man leaned over and whispered, Your Highness, since you gave me the intermediate chemistry, I have already read it twice, but there are still a lot of things that I can't understand. If you are talking about that subatomic constitution of matter, that part involves a lot of physical knowledge, so you have to read another book to understand it. Roland pointed out, so, I suggest that you first read the elementary physics before going through the remnants of the intermediate chemistry again. This way, many of your doubts should be answered. That's what I was going to do, but, he hesitated for a moment before continuing, Your Royal Highness, why are the colors used on the cover of each ancient book different? Does it have any special meaning to it? That is, Roland pondered for a moment, the color represents the requirements and time needed to comprehend it. It was like this? Kyle mused, from green to purple. So, it seems that the deeper the color, the more profound is the knowledge recorded within. In that way, advanced chemistry must surely be black. No, it is orange. Ah, Kyle got startled, why? Roland smiled, who knows? Halfway through the banquet, Roland stepped out of the hall and went to the castle terrace. Standing in the gently blowing evening breeze, he couldn't help but feel a slight chill. Half of autumn has already passed, he realized, so in other words, it wouldn't be long before the lengthy winter would cover the whole western territory with snow and bring about the months of demons. But the situation during this year and the previous year had become as different as black and white. The trade with Margaret's Chamber of Commerce had brought in a lot of floating amount of money, and in exchange for food and materials many of these gold royals were paid to the people in the form of a salary. According to statistics from the convenience market, the recent sales of products has shown a lot of growth, from which some of the goods would significantly improve the people's quality of life. Sales for products such as steak and eggs was growing especially quickly. There was no doubt that this was a sign of the gradual improvement in the living standards for the people. In particular, the indigenous population had all received new free housing, while their salary, compared to before, had also increased a lot. Nowadays, they had even started to buy food which they usually could only enjoy during festivals. The newly introduced population was still at the stage where they were busy saving money in order to purchase a house, but when they managed to settle down, the market was bound to usher for a new peak in sales. What exactly do people need? Sometimes, eating and drinking one's fill was already enough to be grateful to their lord and follow him until their death. During this era, most civilians were easy to please. Your Highness, beware of catching a cold, Nightingale said, and appeared behind him with a thin coat in hand. She threw the cloth to Roland, took out a piece of dried fish from a bag and came to stand beside him. What's going on here? Nothing, Roland said, showing her a smile while he put on the coat. I just suddenly had the urge to see my territory. It seems the town is still very busy, Nightingale said and pointed to the still brightly lit town square. It's already night time and there are still so many people who haven't gone home. That's because today was the first time they were showing the new drama, Dawn, Roland explained happily. Furthermore, it was also the first show after the troops' several months of departure from border town. So, the villagers have probably been full of anticipation to see Miss May and Mrs. Irene again. But that being said, Miss May would soon become Lady May Lannis. He actually had never expected that his own chief knight would act so decisively to hold the hands of the Star of the West. When the other side had informed him with a sincere face about his intention, he was first stupefied for a while before he was finally to respond. The wedding of the chief knight needed the approval of his lord, but Roland naturally had no objection to this kind of happy event. In the end, the wedding for the two was scheduled for after the end of the months of demons, more precisely, for the day when Border Town officially became a city. It was a dead place when I first snuck into this town, Nightingale exclaimed, but now, even while standing in the castle, it seems I still feel the joyful atmosphere surrounding us. Life will improve, day by day. Roland looked up, looking at the cloudless night sky as he took in a deep breath. There were still many things left to be done, such as expanding the scope of education, setting up a public health care, increasing the amount of cultural constructions, encouraging birth rate and so forth. All these things would transform the Western Territory into a stable force and lay out the foundation for the unification of Grey Castle. Nightingale tilted her head and looked at him with keen eyes as she asked, "So what about us?" "Of course, the same is also true for you," Roland said as he patted her head, "I promise." Chapter 316 Re-exploration of the Stone Tower. When Lightning saw His Highness leave, she pulled Maggie to the corner of the hall. "Goo?" Maggie's hair was almost hanging to the floor, giving her the appearance of a floating ghost whenever she moved. Pushing aside the white hair covering her cheeks, Maggie's high puffed-up cheeks and the half-swallowed crisp pork chop dangling in her small mouth became visible. "I found a fascinating place," Lightning whispered. "It's hidden inside the concealing forest. I intend to go and explore it tomorrow. Would you like to come with me on an adventure?" "Guru," Maggie swallowed the food in her mouth and nodded again and again. I want. What should we prepare?" "To go on an adventure, you need 3 items. "Wrong, 3 of the most commonly used things." Lightning discovered that from time to time she has started to use His Highness' strange vocabulary. "You need a flint, dry food, and a dagger. The place isn't far from here. So it will be fine if you just take along enough food for a day. Don't fill your whole pocket with it like you did last time." "Okay, Goo." Maggie patted her chest, ready to leave, but Lightning stopped her once again. "Remember that this adventure is our secret. Don't tell anyone else about it," the little girl said. "We'll start early tomorrow morning." Looking at Maggie's back, who couldn't wait to get back to the table full of food, she curled her lips and began to think about their plan for tomorrow. Despite the success of the bombing mission and meeting His Highness' expectation, she found that her flying has become much less flexible than before, as if something was holding her back. Whenever Lightning raised her speed, she would always have the feeling that a devil was chasing her. This obstruction was brought by fear, she realized. Furthermore, the source of her fear was the exploration of the stone tower. When she saw the horrible figure in the basement doorway, she had lost her cool and calm. At that time, her only thought had been to flee from that place as quickly as she could. Ever since then she had started to question her identity as an explorer. Fear is not terrible, terrible is the unknown. If you want to overcome it, you must approach it first. Within her heart, Lightning silently repeated her father's teaching again and again. Tomorrow she might encounter real danger, but an explorer should not be afraid of risk, nor should they shrink back. If she couldn't get over it, she was scared that she would never be able to fly freely again. This was also the reason why Lightning decided to keep the adventure hidden from His Royal Highness and act without authorization. According to His Royal Highness' plan, the exploration of the stone tower was scheduled for after the months of demons and would be a cooperation between the First Army and the witches. However, she was worried that by that time, even if they visited the stone tower once again, it would be hard for her to see it as somehow fulfilling the idea of conquering the fear, only daring to approach the danger zone by relying on the strength of everyone, just couldn't be called an adventure. Afterward, His Highness may scold her, even going so far as confiscating her ice cream, and her sisters from the Witch Alliance would surely also be worried, but she was still determined to go through with it. As the daughter of the fjord's greatest explorer Thunder, Lightning just couldn't accept her cowardly self. But it didn't mean that her decision was a reckless act. Compared with her unprepared attempt a few months ago, she now had a revolver, a gift from His Highness Dash, possessed a greater understanding of the devils, and lastly, she was being accompanied by Maggie. Especially the last point. If they really did encounter a group of devils in the stone tower, and even if Maggie couldn't change into her demonic beast's appearance to drive them away, they would at least still be able to flee on their own. An explorer doesn't need a brigade of troops to increase their courage, she thought, but they can still have a few trusted teammates. After dinner, Lightning gathered some pieces of honeyed meat and put it into a cloth bag. She then added torches, weapons, and water bags. The successful completion of the bombing mission gave her some confidence, together with His Highness's encouragement and her slightly cheeky reputation let her feel doubly courageous. And just like the blacksmith's saying went, "It's best to strike while the iron is hot," tomorrow would be the best time for them to depart. At first light, Lightning flew to the top of the castle, where Maggie was already sitting on the wall and waiting for her. "Let me check your package." "I got everything you told me, Goo." She changed back to her original form, opened her backpack and held it in front so that the little girl could confirm its content. This time she had reduced the amount of food to half, but at least had also added a dagger and a flint. "All right, this can be counted as qualified, let's set off," Lightning said, rising into the air, flying together with the pigeon toward the concealing forest. In her mind, Lightning had already repeated the journey many times, reaching a point where she could find her way there even with her eyes closed. The weather was a bit overcast today, but it was still much better than the dark clouds that had been there last time. As the color of earth slowly fell away behind them, the closer they came to the stone tower, the greater became Lightning's nervousness. "Did you say you found an interesting place last night? Was it a new eagle nest?" Maggie asked after a while. "No, it's much more interesting than that," Lightning shook her head. "The target we want to explore is an ancient relict, a stone tower that has been left behind for more than 400 years. Since the basement hasn't collapsed yet, we might be able to find some ancient books if we are lucky." "Ancient books?" Maggie shook her wings. "That doesn't sound as if it's more exciting than digging for eagle eggs, Goo." "An eagle nest has at most 2 to 3 eggs, something which you finish up in a flash," the little girl said. "But, if you actually can find such a book and bring it back to His Royal Highness, he will surely reward you with a basket full of eggs. Whether you cook or steam them, you'll be able to eat 3 eggs every day for a long time to come." "Really?" Maggie was full of spirit immediately. "Then let's hurry up and look for ancient books." Goo goo. Around noon, the two successfully arrived at their destination. The remaining half of the stone tower was still hidden within the woods covered in moss and vines. Everything around them looked the same as a few months ago. It didn't seem as if anything had changed. Yet, Lightning still lowered her height and flew a few rounds around the tower to confirm their safety before landing gently. "Have we arrived, Goo?" the pigeon shouted from above her head. "Hush!" Lightning signaled her to be silent. Within the silence of the forest their voices seemed particularly noisy. "Speak softly. There could be devils nearby." "The devil?" Maggie's tail immediately erected. "You wait for me at the top," Lightning said with a lowered voice, pointing to the upper part of the broken tower. "I will go and take a look at the situation first." When she walked over the gradually withered grass, she could hear a slight rustling sound coming from her foot. Reaching the entrance of the tower, she saw that it hadn't been covered by plants and that the small cluster of vines cut off by her dagger last time was still there. Holding her breath, she moved forward along the former road and entered the tower. Taking one step after another, she slowly neared the center of the tower with its passage to the basement. At the time she saw the stair leading into the darkness in front of her, she even heard her heart loudly pounding. Fear comes from the unknown. To overcome the fear, you have to approach the unknown, the little girl constantly encouraged herself, then lit a torch and climbed the stairs leading down. Reaching the corner of the channel, she quietly shot out a probing glance. Only fragments were left from the collapsed wooden door. The basement entrance also wasn't blocked by the devil. The only thing left behind at the door was a thick darkness, like an open mouth waiting to swallow the people who enter. At this moment, she suddenly heard traces of a voice floating over from the darkness, only faintly discernible but still feeling very familiar. Immediately all of her hairs were fully erected, her body was grasped by shivers, and the almost uncontrollable urge to turn around and flee came up once again. She grit her teeth and struggled to suppress the boiling fear at the bottom of her heart. Then, covering her mouth, she bent an ear and listened attentively one more time. This time the call was much clearer, the tone exactly the same as last time. "Help me." Chapter 317 Ice Coffin. Lightning felt goosebumps roll over her body. She suddenly remembered all the stories that were spread among explorers, demons crawling from the abyss, the vengeful ghosts still bearing a grudge at the end of their life, or the wandering undead. These were the nightmares of every explorer. Even if they were already dead, they were still able to take someone's life. They were exceptionally good at using illusions and deception, so could it be that one of these monsters were hidden within this ruin? Although Thunder had said that these stories were just some nonsense made up by third-rate explorers, but at this moment she still felt shaken to her core. Otherwise, who would ever be able to keep shouting under the devil's siege, even holding the same tone and interval after several months have passed? She was now facing a dilemma. If they were indeed one of these evil things from folklore, they would have killed all devils, but then it would become difficult for her to escape after having trespassed into their domain. But if the other party was still able to hold on until now, shouldn't those devils still be inside then? What should we do? After hesitating for a moment, in the end, she decided to fly back to Maggie to discuss the next step with her. After hearing a short narration about the current situation, Maggie raised her head and said, "We could extinguish the torch and stealthily find our way in goo. This way those devils won't be able to see us." But then we won't be able to see them either." "I can turn into an owl," said the pigeon, rubbing her face. "The dark of night isn't a big problem for me, goo." Lightning's eyes lit up. "That's a good idea, but those legendary evil creatures, they live in the dark all their lives. Doesn't that mean they might have a way to find their prey? Otherwise, they should have died from starvation long ago, right? Didn't you say that they were all made-up stories meant to frighten people?" "It wasn't me who said that, it was my father," the little girl corrected. "That's all the same. Anyway, living in Grey Castle, I have never heard of those undead monsters. If they were indeed so horrible, they shouldn't only remain in a little place like the fjords, right?" Rays of light suddenly broke out of Maggie, and the pigeon suddenly began to swell, turning into a gray-brown owl, her eyes full of eagerness. "I thought you would be interested in these legends." "That's right. If I want to qualify as an explorer, I should never let go of an opportunity to verify a legend. Not to mention that I still have to defeat my heart demons. If I flee now, I will waste all of my previous efforts." After hesitating for a moment, Lightning decided to go along with Maggie's suggestion. "But wait, the reason why I want to explore the ruins at all cost is so that I can overcome my fear. But why is Maggie so interested in exploring them? Could it be? It can't be that you're so impatient because of the basket of eggs, right?" Hearing the question, the owl blinked her two big eyes before turning her head away. Once again standing in front of the entrance to the basement, Lightning took a deep breath, tightly gripped her revolver as she silently entered into the deep darkness. She felt much calmer compared to before. That was probably because Maggie was squatting on her shoulder. The ground under her feet felt very wet, even so far that they could encounter some puddle of water from time to time. This area was the terrain's lowest point, thus the rain falling over the tower would slowly come to gather here. Although the basement was equipped with a drainage system in general, after facing wind and rain for hundreds of years, these hidden ditches were most probably already clogged up since an earlier time. Maggie patted her head with her wings, signaling that there were stairs leading downward in front of them. Lightning slowed her pace, and carefully, little by little, she searched her way to the edge of the stairwell. Then, after having cautiously gone all the way down the stair and turned a corner, she suddenly saw a light appear ahead of them. A soft yellow light coming from the end of the stairs penetrating all the way through the dark, which, when falling onto the ground, would be reflected in shaking waves. She carefully studied this for a moment only to discover that the slight shaking on the surface was actually a piece of sewage. By looking at the lower half of the door which was buried in the water, it could be seen that the water level in the basement was about knee-deep. She slowly walked to the point between the staircase and the water, lifted both her feet from the ground, then slowly floated over to the door and throwing a probing glance to the inside. And saw that the area behind the door was spacious and empty. The stone tower's basement was unbelievably huge, offering far more space than the area it had covered on the ground. She couldn't detect any burning torch which created the yellow light. Instead, it seemed that the light came directly from the stones that were embedded in the walls. It roughly outlined the contours of the basement, while at the same time allowing lightning to see everything within the room. A stone platform was erected in the middle of the chamber with several figures standing on top of it. According to their burly size and the carapace on their back, it seemed that they were all devils. Luckily, the enemy hadn't yet noticed any movement coming from the door. Instead, each of them were holding a spear in one hand and a large shield in the other, surrounding a blue stone erected on top of the platform. At this moment, the cry for help was becoming clearer and clearer, as if someone was shouting directly into her ear. "Save me, save me." Lightning had to swallow. What should I do next? Go and save her, Goo, Maggie whispered into her ear. Eh? The little girl got startled, but there are several devils. We cannot win against them. She felt her hand that was firmly gripping the revolver begin to sweat. It wouldn't be a problem if it was Sister Nightingale instead of me, but I alone cannot do it. Are they the demons you spoke of? Maggie inquired. It seems as if they are already dead, Goo. What? Dead? The moment her voice fell, Maggie had already thrown herself into the air, flying toward the stage, giving Lightning quite the scare, stunning for a moment. Otherwise, she would never have forgotten to pull her friend back. But when she finally came back to her senses, Maggie had already thrown herself against one of those devils. With no other option left, Lightning clenched her teeth and raised her gun, trying to remember all the important points that Nightingale had taught her. But what she then saw was completely unlike what she had expected. When the owl pecked a devil twice, it crumbled down, just like a piece of broken stones after experiencing countless years of wind and frost, turning into a pile of floating ashes. What's going on? Lightning stepped beside Maggie and looked at the other three devils in amazement. Looking at them under the weak yellow light, she discovered that their bodies were covered with tiny cracks, and that spiders had spun nets between their legs. Looking through their hideous helmets, she could see that their eyes and skin had turned pale, showing no traces of vitality. It was like this, she thought, within the dark light. An owl's eyes are indeed several times better than mine, which allowed Maggie to be able to speak so confidently. But before she could relax, Lightning's gaze was already completely attracted by something else. On the high platform surrounded by the devils stood a huge cube. What had looked like a stone column from a distance actually turned out to be transparent crystal when seen from up close. Wrapped within the crystal cube was a woman who wore a gorgeous robe. Her eyes were closed, her hands stretched open, and her hair spread out behind her as if it was still fluttering in the wind. Is she a witch, Goo? Maggie asked as she flew to the top of the crystal, then fiercely pecked against the surface. However, this time it didn't crumble into countless pieces, but instead sent out a sharp and clear hitting sound. Very hard, Goo. I do not know, Lightning murmured as she laid her hand against the crystal. A cold chill penetrated her skin. The crystal's surface was covered with thick dust, which made it obvious that the woman had been in this sarcophagus for a very long time. Yet her expression was still so lifelike. Her eyebrows were raised into a frown, looking a bit confused, but even more than that, they also seemed a bit anxious and worried. Save me. The sound could be heard once again. It was coming from behind the crystal. Chapter 318 Unknown. Roland scratched over the surface with the brush, writing a long paragraph on paper. Before he came to this world, he had only drawn mechanical blueprints using the computer. At that time he had already thought that there would only be small chances where he would ever need to write characters using a pen, Never did he expect to have to use this kind of ancient form of recording ever again. 2 papers filled with text laid next to his hand, containing the next plans for what he wanted to implement. One plan was the large-scale production of sulfuric acid and the new equipment that was needed, made by the hands of Anna and Soraya. Instead of using lead for the reaction vessel, they would use the more robust and reliable iron together with an anti-corrosion coating. Furthermore, the vessels would be made 3 times larger than the previous trial versions. Considering that at the present stage there was fundamentally no way to collect or purify the produced industrial waste gas, mainly used from combustion of sulfur and leakage of nitrogen oxides, Roland decided to place it at the southern end of the industrial park, far enough away from the residential area and the Redwater River. Furthermore, he planned to use stones so as to better isolate the building and also erect a chimney to raise the altitude at which the emissions would be released. Increasing the output of sulfuric acid was of great help to enlarge the scale of concentrated nitric acid, so putting this equipment into production would be the most important task at present. The content of the document were instructions to Kyle Sichi to select a group of disciples who will be specializing in the production of sulfuric acid. In addition, Berev also needed to recruit some reliable local residents who could work as auxiliary handyman, raising the number of staff required for the chemical plant to around 100 people. The second document was the formation of a public healthcare system. To be honest, Roland wasn't familiar with this subject. Talking about it, he didn't even understand a single thing about modern medicine. However, this didn't prevent him from using his common sense to develop a plan which meets all of their current needs. First of all, the biggest task of this department would be to give publicity to modern scientific discoveries. Things such as boiling the water before drinking it, the fact that meat has to be fully cooked before eating, the cause of illnesses and how they manage to spread, the difference between parasites and microbes, and so forth. Thanks to his growing prestige, it wouldn't be difficult for him to get people to do what he wants, but if he wanted them to understand why they should do something, he would need someone to do the publication and education for him. It would be useless if they only spoke once about these things. Instead, it had to be repeated 7 or 8 times, maybe even dozens of times, like those slogans that were hanging at the edge of the field. If they continually spoke about it, their view would always become accepted in the end. The second part was encouraging the birth rate. Since the city hall only had a limited number of staff, Roland did not want to set up a separate family planning department. Thus he temporarily also placed this under the public health care's responsibility. The population was always the most scarce resource in this era, and the best way to confront this was by leading people to give birth to more lives. Nana's ability completely erased the risk of giving birth and many of the other thorny problems. And with her help, the postnatal survival rate would almost be around 100%. In order to avoid the abandonment of baby girls, as well as restricting any changes of something like that happening in future, Roland developed a full subsidy and punishment policy. For example, the subsidy for baby girls was slightly higher than for baby boys, subsidies would be given in installments, and the abandonment of babies would be punished with fines or imprisonment, and so on. The last point was the regulation of payment. Except for fertility treatment, the hospital would charge a fee in accordance with the amount of magic that Nana needed to use. This way it would reduce the little girl's burden as well as lay the foundation for the future hospital system. Roland had also already found the first person he wanted in charge of this department, Viscount Tigupine, Nana's father. The third document was currently in the state of being written, and was the most complex and far-reaching plan. It was the plan to establish Border Town as a city. It was related to the problems created by the expansion of Border Town and the later merger with Longsong Stronghold. When that time came about, there would definitely be a demand for new laws concerning the governance of these two places, and both the judicial system and the public security system would have to be implemented. However, if he wanted to make these points watertight, merely relying on his own knowledge wouldn't be enough. Thus Roland intended to draft a list first, and later discuss all the details with City Hall Premier Minister Berev. After finishing the introductory part, Roland felt some pain in his wrist from all the writing, so he went to the window to take a break. Today's weather was very gloomy, and from morning to afternoon he had yet to see the sun. The sky was consistently being covered with dark clouds, and gave the impression that torrential rains would soon be coming. The chilly autumn wind swept over the castle backyard and Roland heard the olive leaves rustling. At this moment, a black spot appeared on the horizon, flying in the direction of the castle. "It's lightning," Nightingale's voice came from behind him. "She probably went to the concealing forest to pick some mushrooms again," Roland said with a smile. Usually, when they weren't on investigation duty, the goal of Lightning and Maggie's practice was left up to themselves. Therefore, it was entirely reasonable for them to not come back to the castle to eat lunch. According to the two, they would often be somewhere in the woods looking for some eggs and honeycombs, or catching some strange animals to barbecue and eat. It was likely that all explorers would ultimately transform into Bear Grylls. Although the bird-kissing mushrooms mainly grew on trees, he could not help but always think of the story called The Mushroom-Plucking Girl. "Your Highness, your smile is a little strange." "Kiki, I had to think of a little short story, do you want to hear it?" "Okay." Roland cleared his throat. "Once upon a time, there was a little girl, she liked to gather mushrooms." "Wait." The shadow was slowly growing, but contrary to what they expected it didn't fly over the castle, but instead lowered her altitude and went straight to the window of their office. Feeling shocked, Roland opened the window only seconds before Lightning directly flew into the room without stopping. "Why, Your Highness?" Hardly had she landed when she already started to shout in excitement, "I found a witch." "A witch?" Roland asked full of curiosity, "Where?" "In the stone tower hidden within the concealing forest," Lightning pointed to Maggie, who flew into the office just at that moment. "She can testify." "Goo goo." Maggie agreed. "Stone tower?" He frowned. "Carefully tell me what happened, from the beginning to the end." After listening to Lightning's narration, Roland could not help but suck in a mouth of cold lump. This fellow is too bold, actually only taking a pigeon along she dares to explore a ruin which contained devils. But what's even more frightening, is that there is still a witch sealed inside these ruins. Of course, there is also the possibility that she could be an ordinary person sealed away by a witch. In any case, this is incredible news. What was the cry of help? "It is coming from this thing. I found it on a table behind her." Lightning pulled a palm-sized square box from her pocket. At first glance it looked just like a small makeup mirror. However, when she opened the lid, Roland saw a red gem embedded inside of it, and when Lightning pulled a trigger next to it, the anxious-sounding voice of a female suddenly appeared in everyone's ears. "Save me." Hearing the voice, Roland's body began to shudder. The sound seemed to flicker, sometimes appearing near, sometimes coming from far off. It was indeed somewhat horrifying. If he imagined himself hearing this distressed voice after entering a dark underground chamber, he would certainly turn around and flee without any hesitation. "The gem contains magic." Nightingale appeared behind them and said in astonishment, "Within it, I can see a weak magic whirlpool, just like inside a witch's body." "Well, it seems to be a magic machine which continuously repeats previously spoken words. With this, the probability that the other person is a witch has increased." "Did you find any other stones inside the basement of the stone tower?" "I didn't take a closer look. Also, many parts of the room were flooded." Lightning shook her head. "At that time, I only thought about coming back and telling you about this news as soon as possible. Never do something like this again, especially if you want to go to a dangerous place. You should first ask for permission." Roland patted her head, then looked over at Nightingale. "Call Iron Axe and all of the members of the Witch Alliance over to the office. The exploration of the relics will be scheduled earlier than planned." Chapter 319 Autumn Snow. After the others arrived, Roland informed them about Lightning's discoveries from beginning to end. A transparent crystal coffin in the basement of an ancient ruin, without any sign of corrosion even though the environment is damp and moist, a magic stone which regularly released a call for help, and devils broke into countless pieces upon contact. "What do you all think about this?" "You mean she could be a witch?" Anna pondered. "If she is still alive, we can probably learn more about what happened 400 years ago. It is also possible that she isn't a witch, or even from that era," Scroll said after a moment of hesitation. "Furthermore, Furthermore, she might not necessarily be on our side, Leaves added. This sentence left Roland slightly shocked. Indeed, if these remains had been left by the church, it is more than likely that the other side could be a member of the church. Also, according to Lightning's description, she was wearing a gorgeous gown, which could mean that she was a high-ranking member. In the case that she was an ordinary person, everything would be alright, but if she really is a witch, then dealing with her would be quite tricky. Looking at the fights Ashes and Nightingale had been in, it could be seen that it was impossible to predict the kind of attack a witch could perform beforehand. Furthermore, there was no clear dividing line to rank witches by strength. The extraordinaries might be unable to contend against witches with unique abilities even when they were wearing the god stone of retaliation, and if combat witches were surprise attacked by support witches, the situation would be equally worrying. No one can guarantee that her ability won't pose a threat to the Witch Alliance if she held any malicious intent towards us, unless we wake her within the influence of a god stone of relation. You're all crazy, how can you even think that she won't be on our side? Lily, grasping her forehead, could no longer sit still and decided to interrupt. She should be from more than 400 years ago, how could she still be alive today? It goes without saying that witches all die young, even if they possess the strong body of an extraordinary witch, they might never exceed 100 years of age. All of you are thinking too much. Most likely it's just like I said, the moment we free her, the person inside will be just like the devils and turn into dust. The reason why most witches die young is because of the so-called demonic bite, Roland corrected. A witch's physical fitness is generally much greater than the average person. Thus their actual lifespan should also be longer. The average person's lifespan is 40 to 50 years. Lily grunted, do you think everyone can live as long as a turtle can? The reason why the average lifespan is merely 40 to 50 years is because of an inadequate food supply and a low level of medical care. As long as the standard of daily living is increased, it should quickly increase by another 20 years. However, what she said is by no means utterly unjustified, Roland conceded. Even if I add those 20 years, there still remains a gap to reach 400 years. Even if we were turtles, I'm afraid we could never live for that long. But she is still alive, really, Lightning cried aloud. If you could have seen her, you'd immediately understand why I say so. Compared with the dead devils, she looks entirely different. Her skin is smooth, and her lips are full of color. Tell them, Maggie. Goo. What Lightning said is true. Alright, don't fight, Wendy stood up and interrupted. No matter if she is still alive or already dead, it's worth a try. Are you sure? Scroll asked, unsure while knitting her brows. If she really is one of those church's witches, as long as we hang a god stone of relation around her before she wakes up, it should be all right. Moreover, we also have Anna and Nightingale, so I believe she won't be able to cause much of a problem. Wendy calmly said. The key point is, it is possible that she might know about the incident that occurred more than 400 years ago. The possibility that she can bring light into the darkness is worth the risk of rescuing her. Indeed, gathering more information about the devils is very critical for the survival of Border Town. Moreover, any news the church desired to hide so much will surely be extremely unfavorable for them. Thus, if we can take hold of this knowledge ahead of time, there's a chance that it might help us take the initiative in the future battle. Soon after, Anna and Nightingale also agreed to Wendy's view, so even though she still thought that it was wrong, Scroll no longer opposed them and the Witch Alliance came to a consensus. The First Army? Roland looked toward Iron Axe. At most, you can send up to 50 people, the latter started to talk. Your Highness, you already sent out several squads to assist City Hall to recruit refugees from the other regions. By now there are only around 500 left in Border Town. Even though Timothy has encountered Heaven's wrath, there's still a chance he might become desperate and launch a large-scale assault on the Western Territory. Thus, the First Army needs to have enough soldiers to guard against a possible attack from King City. I understand, Roland said while nodding. A size of 50 people is a little small. If they happen to have to face a long-range attack from the devils who can throw their spears from out of view, the damage caused could be quite serious. If I want to make up for this, in addition to Lightning's and Maggie's air surveillance, Sylvie's magic eye ability will also be essential. The ideal force to send out would be a ground force, supported by a team of witches stationed in a hot air balloon. The witches will be responsible for observation and close combat battles, while the First Army will use their flintlocks to suppress the enemy over a long distance. But then, the witches from Sleeping Island will also learn about the existence of the deep sleeper in the ruin. Roland thought through all the possibilities again and again, but in the end, he still decided to bring Sylvie along. After all, during this rescue mission, their safety would still be the most important consideration. Just when he planned to arrange the rescue plan, Mystery Moon exhaled loudly before exclaiming, "Heavens! What is happening?" Hearing her cry, everyone followed her gaze and looked out of the window, only to freeze up immediately. Roland, not daring to believe what he saw, opened the window, then was finally forced to accept what he saw. Beyond any of their expectations, white flakes had begun to fall from the gloomy sky. They were hiding the sky and covering the earth, but completely lacked any sound. He stretched his hand out, catching a handful of white drops, which made an ice-cold sensation spread through his palm. "It's snow. This is not normal." According to his knowledge, it would only snow in the Western Territory during winter, but now, it wasn't winter yet. "It is normal for it to snow during the last month of autumn." He looked at Iron X, but the latter wore a serious expression and said, "I have been in Border Town for 7 or 8 years, and until now I have never experienced something like this." Once the snow began to descend from the heaven, it meant that the months of demons had arrived, and the sun would be buried behind a wall of clouds until its next brilliant bloom. During this time, the entire Western Territory would face the threat of demonic beasts. Not to mention the First Army. Even when using a hot air balloon, the witches would still be in danger. At this time, the concealing forest was full of savage demonic beasts. So leaving the protection of the wall was an incredibly risky matter. For now, he was forced to call a stop to the rescue mission and wait for the sky to clear up. At the bottom of his heart, he felt that the early snow was likely an accident and would soon end. After all, the temperature was still at the average level of autumn and it also hadn't dropped by much. However, 3 days later, the town was wrapped in silver, the distant mountains and woods were covered by a layer of white gauze. A beautiful scenery like this was definitely a rare view in his past, but Roland wasn't in the mood to appreciate the landscape. Although the snowfall had weakened a lot, there were still some snowflakes falling from the sky. The First Army had also entered a state of full alertness, and has established regular patrols along the new wall. Furthermore, they had also erected a temporary camp at the foot of the new city wall, so that the soldiers would be able to quickly enter into battle. The temperature had changed almost overnight, forcing Roland to change his clothes from his unlined garment to a knitted cotton coat. On the 4th day, hearing the news from the front made Roland's heart drop. The western city wall had suffered an attack from demonic beasts. The months of demons had arrived more than 1 month ahead of time. Chapter 320 Sleeping Spell. Fjords, Sleeping Island. "I never expected that the first guest of the sleeping spell would actually be you," Tilly smiled and said as she handed over a cup of boiling hot fish soup. "It was only due to your help that we could explore the Shadow Islands." "You are too polite," Thunder answered as he received the fish soup. "Regarding the mysterious sea, even if I don't receive any more commissions from you, I would still like to go there a few more times for myself. To be honest, without your witch's support, exploring the sea east of the Shadow Island would definitely be very dangerous for an explorer." He sipped his fish soup, then let out a sigh. It's boiled black-tailed fish soup, it's really delicious." In the fjords, black tea and barley wine from black tea were considered to be unpopular. She was used to the custom of eating a bowl of ice-cold frozen fish during midsummer, while here they drank a bowl of boiling hot fish soup when it got cold. They used a different method to cook the fish, so the taste was not at all the same. This was something Tilly had gradually come to understand after arriving at Sleeping Island. "Therefore, you were impatient to come and visit the sleeping spell?" "The right thing to say would be that I can't wait to go on the next expedition," Thunder straightforwardly stated. "The scene I saw last time when I looked through the observation mirror left me stunned. What is there on the land, and for what reason is there a stone gate embedded inside that overhanging cliff? I wish I could fly there and go take a look." "Is that it?" Tilly also poured a cup of fish soup for herself. you should already be aware that I'm planning to personally go to Border Town. One reason is to personally speak with the feudal lord and witch alliance, another reason is so that I can increase my knowledge by experiencing the months of demons in Border Town. Don't you want to come with us and take a look? For a moment Thunder was silent, but then he said with a broad grin, not yet. She should be having quite a good time over there. The way it is right now is also good. After all, the thing with exploring is, an accident can always happen one day. I already lost her mother, I really don't want to also lose her. When that time comes, I ask you. I will, Tilly nodded, after all, she is also one of our members. Speaking until here she stopped and showed him a smile before continuing, but business is business. Even though you have helped us a lot, you still have to take the costs to employ our witches on the table. Of course, business is business, that is the way of the fjords. Thunder drained his bowl of fish soup before he laughingly agreed. So, who did he hire? As she saw that Thunder had left the palace, Ashes entered the hall from outside, sitting cross-legged before Tilly. Magic servant Molly, the door of random orbit, and puppet remote shadow. Tilly spread out the contract. In the end, the fee was set at 4,800 gold royals. The payback is very generous, right? 4,000, Ash's eyes became big. Where did he get all the money from? Don't forget, Thunder is the most famous explorer in the fjords, the fifth princess said laughingly, no matter if it is the discovery of new routes or finding treasures when exploring new areas, all of it can bring in plenty of money. It was only because of this that he was repeatedly able to recruit such a large group of experienced sailors who would be willing to follow him to explore those mysterious and dangerous zones. But, with witches, he can greatly reduce the risk, and ever since ancient times it has always been thought as a good bargain when one can offset risk with money. However, is that really okay? Ashes asked unsure. The establishment of a bounty guild will indeed bring a lot of wealth for Sleeping Island, but, at the same time, the abilities of us witches will be exposed, if this ever spread to the church's ears. Sleeping Spell was a new guild that Tilly had formed. From it, explorers could hire suitable witches to help them complete their expeditions. Of course, in addition to the main project, they would also provide many convenient services, such as repairing damaged items, producing exquisite works of art, quickly constructing houses, providing insecticide for growing flowers and so on. As long as the witches don't use their ability to do anything evil, Sleeping Spell will come to be accepted. Of course, all this was only possible under the premise they announced their abilities publicly. Tilly took Ash's hand. Didn't I already tell you? I do not care about those gold royals, but I hope that through the Bounty Guild more people will learn about Sleeping Island, and thus reach out to us to make a deal. Thunder has a saying I agree with, fear comes from the unknown, the same is true for the witches. The fear of the people of the fjords and the Four Kingdoms is nothing more than the slander of the church and the result of their own ignorance. I can't force them to take the initiative to come in contact with us and try to understand us witches. Therefore, we can only step forward and actively go and promote ourselves. Telling them again and again that we witches aren't the devil's messengers and that our abilities aren't strange and unpredictable, that they awaken from ordinary people, and that our essence is still that of a human being. Whenever there is a complete understanding of each other, there will no longer be anything left to fear. She paused for a moment, then continued, as for the church, they have never cared what we are capable of. They simply send out their army of judges to capture us, they even occasionally send out the gods' punishment army. Furthermore, regardless of our abilities, in front of the gods' stones of retaliation, they are all the same. I hope you are right, Ashes whispered, I only know how to fight and kill, but regarding this matter I'm unable to help you. You have already helped me a lot, Tilly said, showing her a reassuring smile. If we want to further develop Sleeping Island, the most important thing for us will be to associate the fjord's inhabitants with us witches from the island. The creation of mutual understanding will be a slow process, and I'm only doing all this in order to shorten the process as much as will be possible. In addition, the Bounty Guild can also play a special role in achieving our goal. She stuck out her tongue and revealed a sly smile before saying, that's to find new uses for the seemingly useless abilities, so that support witches will no longer be discriminated against or think of their abilities as useless. Hearing her reasoning, Ashes began to laugh. There are always so many reasons for your actions. Whenever you reveal so many layers one after another, it makes it hard for other people not to come to accept them. That's because I'm always saying the correct thing, Tilly said before changing the topic. Maggie has not returned to Sleeping Island yet. Could something have happened? Perhaps something has delayed her travel. Ashes pondered about her next words. Or what? She might no longer want to come back, Ashes said, while shrugging. Compared to the fjords, the living condition in Border Town is much better. In the past, I already told you not to send witches there. What will we do if Honey or Lotus also don't want to come back? Then we should head over there at once, Tilly said. Oh, well, I will immediately get ready. What? For a moment Ashes froze before she recovered enough to ask, we are going to travel to them? The fifth princess curled her lips. Didn't we reach an agreement that we will help them resist the demonic beasts, and, while doing this, we can also conventionally pick up the other witches? If we don't have Lotus, the people coming with the Crescent Moon Bay immigration next year won't have any houses to live in. But right now, there is still 1 month left to the beginning of the winter. Do we really have to go so soon? We will have to spend a lot of time on the road. And if Border Town happens to encounter any trouble along the way, we might have to help the witches as soon as possible. And, she winked at Ashes, I also want to go see what kind of person my disgusting older brother has turned into.